The steel was already half a century old when it landed in the jungles of Southeast Asia. Every M1911A1 pistol that rode American hips through the paddies and tunnels of Vietnam had been forged in the fires of 2 world wars, rebuilt in peacetime arsenals, and marked with the scratches and scars of decades in military service. By 1965, when the first major American combat units splashed ashore at Da Nang, the venerable .45 caliber sidearm was entering its final chapter as America's standard military pistol. But this would not be a quiet retirement. In the dense canopies of the Mekong Delta, the claustrophobic darkness of Viet Song tunnels, and the desperate close-quarters battles that defined America's longest war, John Moses Browning's masterpiece would prove that age meant nothing when stopping power meant everything. The M1911A1 didn't just serve in Vietnam, it became the difference between life and death for thousands of American soldiers, Marines, and airmen who found themselves in situations where 7 rounds of 230-grain 45 ACP ammunition were all that stood between them and eternity. This is the story of that pistol's final war, told through the voices of those who carried it, those who faced it, and those who tried desperately to copy its deadly effectiveness. Private First Class Michael Dias of the 25th Infantry Division had never seen his M1911A1 before the day it was issued to him at Siu Chi Base Camp in March of 1967. But the pistol had been to war twice before he was born. The frame bore the markings of the Colt Manufacturing Company and a serial number that placed its birth in 1919, just 1 year after the guns fell silent on the Western Front. During the interwar years, it had been rebuilt at Rock Island Armory. The RIA stamp was clearly visible on the frame, evidence of one of the thousands of refurbishment programs that kept America's pistols in service through the lean peacetime budgets of the 1930s. By the time Dias wrapped his fingers around the checkered brown plastic grips, this particular .45 had already survived the beaches of Normandy, the jungles of the Pacific, and the frozen hills of Korea. The parkerized finish was worn smooth in places where countless hands had drawn it from leather holsters, and the barrel showed the telltale signs of having been relined during one of its arsenal overhauls. "She ain't pretty?" Staff Sergeant Williams told the young soldier as he signed for the weapon. "But she's been keeping Americans alive since before your daddy was born. Don't you go losing her now." What Dias didn't know, what most of the young Americans arriving in Vietnam couldn't comprehend, was that they were inheriting not just a sidearm, but the final chapter of the most successful military handgun design in history. The United States had procured approximately 2.7 million M1911 and M1911A1 pistols during the weapon's military service life, and by 1967, nearly every single one of those pistols was a veteran of multiple wars and countless rebuilds. The numbers told the story of American industrial might and military pragmatism. During World War II alone, about 1.9 million M1911A1 pistols had been manufactured by a constellation of contractors that included not just Colt and Springfield Armory, but Remington Rand, Union Switch and Signal Company, and even the Singer Sewing Machine Company. The Singer produced pistols, of which only 500 were made, would later become the most sought-after collector pieces, but in 1967 they were just working tools in the hands of soldiers who had more immediate concerns than future collectability. By the time American forces began their major commitment to South Vietnam, the pipeline of newly manufactured pistols had been shut off for over 20 years. The last complete M1911A1 pistols had been purchased by the government in 1945, with all contracts terminated at war's end. What this meant for the soldiers of Vietnam was that every .45 they carried had been rebuilt, refurbished, and recycled through the American military machine since the Truman administration. The rebuilding process itself was a testament to American military logistics. From the mid-1920s to the mid-1950s, thousands of 1911s and 1911A1's had been systematically refurbished at U.S. arsenals and service depots. These rebuilds ranged from minor inspections to complete overhauls, and pistols that underwent this process were typically marked with the arsenal's initials, IA for Rock Island Armory, SA for Springfield Armory, or AA for Augusta Arsenal. What emerged from this process was a generation of sidearms that mixed parts from multiple manufacturers and decades of production. A typical Vietnam-era M1911A1 might sport a Colt frame from 1918, a Remington Rand slide from 1943, and internal parts that had been manufactured by any of a dozen different contractors. Veterans of the conflict would later describe their issued pistols as bastardized beyond belief, but with a grudging respect that acknowledged their fundamental reliability. The technical specifications of these Vietnam-era pistols remained essentially unchanged from Browning's original design. Each M1911A1 was a single-action, recoil-operated, magazine-fed handgun chambered for the 45 ACP cartridge. The overall length measured 8.5 inches, with a 5.03-inch barrel and an unloaded weight of 2 pounds 7 ounces. When loaded with a standard 7-round magazine plus 1 round in the chamber, the complete weapon weighed exactly 3 pounds. The cartridge itself was a masterpiece of stopping power over velocity. The standard-issue military 45 ACP round featured a 230-grain round nose bullet traveling at approximately 830 feet per second when fired from the 5-inch barrel of an M1911A1. This translated to a muzzle velocity of 253 meters per second and a muzzle energy that, while modest by modern standards, delivered devastating terminal ballistics at close range. The genius of the 45 ACP lay not in its speed, but in its mass and diameter. Where the 9mm rounds favored by most of America's allies delivered their energy through velocity, the 45 relied on the simple physics of a heavy, large-diameter projectile that transferred its energy efficiently to the target. The cartridge operated at a relatively low maximum chamber pressure of 21,000 pounds per square inch, compared to 35,000 psi for both 9mm parabellum and 40 S&W rounds. This lower pressure had practical advantages in the field. It reduced stress on the weapon's components, extending service life in an era when replacement parts were precious commodities. It also meant that the 45 ACP rounds were inherently subsonic when fired from handguns, making them naturally suited for suppressed operations, a characteristic that would prove valuable for special operations units operating in the shadows of the Vietnam conflict. But for most American servicemen arriving in Vietnam, the technical specifications were less important than the simple psychological comfort of carrying a weapon with a reputation for reliability and stopping power. The M1911A1 represented continuity with a generation of American warriors who had carried the same basic design through the trenches of France, the islands of the Pacific, and the ridgelines of Korea. Master Sergeant Robert Maxwell of the 1st Cavalry Division, Airmobile, had carried his first 1911 in Korea, and he understood the weight of that continuity. "You got to understand," he told the young troopers of his squadron, "this ain't just a gun. This here's the same design that Sergeant York used to put down them German machine gunners in 1918. Same basic gun that the Marines carried up Iwo Jima. Same gun that kept MacArthur's boys alive when the Chinese came pouring over the Yalu." Maxwell's pistol, like thousands of others carried by American forces in Vietnam, bore the visible scars of its journey through the military supply system. The original bluing had long since given way to the more practical parkerized finish that had become standard during World War II. The wooden grip panels that had adorned early production pistols had been replaced with the brown plastic grips that were more resistant to moisture and rough handling. Most tellingly, the pistol showed the accumulated wear of decades in service. The edges were rounded from countless draw cycles. The grip safety bore the impression of thumbs from multiple users, and the slide stop showed the wear pattern of thousands of field strippings for cleaning and maintenance. This was not a museum piece or a parade ground showpiece. This was a working tool that had been maintained in fighting condition for nearly half a century. The logistics of keeping these aging weapons in service was itself a marvel of American military efficiency. While no new complete pistols were being manufactured for military use, the military continued to purchase slides, barrels, and small parts as replacement components through the early 1990s. This parts pipeline ensured that even the most worn Vietnam-era pistols could be returned to fighting condition with relatively simple maintenance procedures. The typical American soldier arriving in Vietnam would receive his M1911A1 along with 2 7-round magazines, a cleaning kit, and a brief refresher on the weapon's manual of arms. The pistol came in a standard M1916 holster, a flap-top leather design that had been in use, with minor modifications, since the First World War. The complete kit, including pistol, magazines, holster, and cleaning equipment, added approximately 5 pounds to a soldier's basic load. For most infantry soldiers, the pistol represented insurance rather than a primary weapon. The M16 rifle or M14 rifle served as the main tool of warfare, with the 45 relegated to the role of backup weapon in case of primary weapon malfunction or close quarters encounters where a rifle was impractical. But for certain specialists, helicopter crews, forward observers, radio operators, and the elite tunnel fighters known as tunnel rats, the M1911A1 would prove to be far more than just insurance. The first major test of these aging pistols in Vietnam came not in a dramatic set-piece battle, but in the countless small unit actions that characterized the early years of American involvement. Patrols moving through dense jungle, ambushes in rice paddies, and chance encounters with Viet Cong forces created scenarios where the reliability and stopping power of the 45 would be measured not in technical specifications, but in American lives saved or lost. By late 1967, as American troop strength approached its peak of over 500,000 personnel, virtually every M1911A1 in the U.S. inventory was either in Southeast Asia or supporting the training pipeline that fed replacements into the combat theater. The pistols that had been museum pieces in peacetime armories were pressed back into service, refurbished one more time, and issued to young Americans who would carry them into the most intense small unit warfare the U.S. military had experienced since the Korean conflict. The stage was set for the final chapter of the M1911A1's military career. In the steaming jungles of South Vietnam, the ancient tunnels of Siu Chi, and the urban battlefields of Hue and Saigon, Browning's masterpiece would face its ultimate test not against the massed armies and clear battle lines of previous wars, but against an enemy who fought in the shadows, struck without warning, and measured victory not in ground gained, but in American resolve broken. The steel was old, but it was about to prove that some things only get better with age. The first-time specialist Tommy Martinez descended into a Viet Cong tunnel near Siu Chi in April of 1968. He carried nothing but an M1911A1 pistol, a flashlight, and what he later described as more fear than any human being should have to carry. Martinez was one of approximately 100 American soldiers who volunteered for the most dangerous job in Vietnam, clearing enemy tunnel systems that stretched for hundreds of miles beneath the battlefields of South Vietnam. They called themselves tunnel rats, and their primary weapon was a pistol that had been designed 60 years earlier for cavalry officers and frontier soldiers. In the suffocating darkness of underground passageways barely wide enough for a man's shoulders, the M1911A1 proved to be exactly the right tool for exactly the wrong job anyone would want to volunteer for. The tunnel systems that Martinez and his fellow tunnel rats faced were marvels of military engineering that had been decades in the making. The Siu Chi tunnels alone stretched for over 120 miles, creating an underground city complete with living quarters, kitchens, ordnance factories, hospitals, and bomb shelters. Some sections even contained theaters and music halls, turning the subterranean network into a complete parallel civilization designed to support the communist war effort. "You got to understand the magnitude of what we were dealing with," recalled Lieutenant Colonel James Thompson, who commanded the tunnel clearance operations for the 25th Infantry Division. "These weren't just holes in the ground. These were sophisticated military installations that could house entire villages. And our job was to go down there with a pistol and a flashlight and clear them out room by room." The tunnel rats were selected based on specific physical requirements that had nothing to do with traditional military prowess. Most were shorter than 5 feet 5 inches with wiry builds that could navigate passages as narrow as 2 feet in diameter. Mental toughness was equally important. The psychological stress of crawling through claustrophobic darkness while expecting mortal danger at every turn broke down even the bravest soldiers. But it was the choice of weapon that defined the tunnel rats' unique role in the Vietnam conflict. While other soldiers carried M16 rifles, M60 machine guns, and an array of crew-served weapons, the tunnel rats descended into the earth armed primarily with the same pistol that had served American forces since the Taft administration. The decision to use the M1911A1 in tunnel operations was based on practical necessity rather than tactical preference. Rifle-length weapons were useless in passages barely wide enough for a human body, and the confined space made even submachine guns difficult to maneuver effectively. The pistol's compact dimensions, 8.5 inches overall length, made it the largest practical firearm that could be effectively employed in underground combat. More importantly, the 45 ACP cartridge delivered stopping power that could end a close-quarters encounter with a single well-placed shot. In tunnels where engagement ranges were measured in feet rather than yards, the pistol's limited effective range was irrelevant, while its massive wound potential was absolutely critical. Martinez learned these lessons the hard way during his third tunnel mission in May of 1968. Moving through a passage near the village of Ben Suc, he encountered a Viet Cong soldier armed with an AK-47 assault rifle in a chamber barely 8 feet square. The confined space made the enemy's rifle nearly useless, while Martinez's M1911A1 proved devastatingly effective at point-blank range. The 45 just ended it, Martinez recalled decades later. One shot. The stopping power of that big 230-grain bullet meant there wasn't going to be any extended firefight in that little space. It was over before the other guy could even get his rifle around. The terminal ballistics of the 45 ACP in close-quarters combat were a product of both bullet design and simple physics. The standard military load featured a full metal jacket projectile that retained its mass and diameter while penetrating tissue, creating a substantial permanent wound cavity. Unlike higher-velocity pistol cartridges that might over-penetrate or fragment, the 45 delivered its energy in a controlled, predictable manner that was ideal for the Tunnel Rat's mission. The psychological effect of the weapon was equally important. The M1911A1's distinctive report, a deep, authoritative boom rather than the sharp crack of smaller calibers, served as both weapon and psychological warfare tool in the echo chamber environment of underground combat. Enemy soldiers who heard that unmistakable sound knew they were facing American firepower that had been proven in decades of warfare. But the pistol also presented unique challenges in the tunnel environment. The muzzle blast from a 45 ACP cartridge in a confined space was deafening, often leaving tunnel rats temporarily deaf after firefights. The bright muzzle flash could destroy night vision for crucial seconds, leaving soldiers temporarily blind in complete darkness. Some tunnel rats attempted to mitigate these problems by carrying alternative weapons. The Colt Police Positive Special in .38 caliber was popular among some units, as was the Smith & Wesson Model 10 revolver. A few specialized units even employed suppressed weapons, including the Quiet Special Purpose revolver in .40 caliber and various suppressed .22 caliber pistols. But the majority of tunnel rats continued to rely on the M1911A1 despite its drawbacks. The weapon's reliability in the harsh underground environment was legendary. Mud, moisture, and debris that would jam other firearms simply wiped off the pistol's robust mechanism. The large cartridge case and powerful extraction system meant that stuck cases, a common problem with smaller calibers in dirty conditions, were virtually unknown with the 45. Staff Sergeant Harold Roper of the 1st Infantry Division described the M1911A1 as the only honest gun in Vietnam. His reasoning was simple. Everything else could lie to you. Your M16 could jam when you needed it most. The machine guns could overheat. The mortars could misfire. But that 45 would speak the truth every single time you pulled the trigger. The truth that Roper spoke of was measured in American lives saved and enemy positions cleared. During Operation Cedar Falls in January of 1967, tunnel rats from the 1st Battalion, 5th Infantry Regiment, 25th Infantry Division uncovered the Viet Cong District Headquarters of Siu Chi, containing 500,000 documents that provided unprecedented intelligence on enemy operations. The discovery was made possible by soldiers armed with M1911A1 pistols who had fought their way through miles of defended tunnels. Among the documents recovered were maps of U.S. bases, detailed accounts of Viet Cong movement from Cambodia into South Vietnam, lists of political sympathizers, and plans for failed assassination attempts on high-ranking American officials, including Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara. The intelligence value of this single operation, enabled by tunnel rats carrying 60-year-old pistols, altered American understanding of the enemy's capabilities and organization. The human cost of tunnel warfare was reflected in the tunnel rats' casualty statistics. Of the approximately 100 soldiers who served in this specialized role, most were either killed in the tunnels or wounded so severely that they could not continue their underground missions. The unique culture that developed among these soldiers included an absolute commitment to never leave a wounded or dead comrade underground, a promise that led to some of the war's most heroic acts of individual courage. Sergeant Mike Yates of the 25th Infantry Division exemplified this commitment during a tunnel clearing operation near Tay Ninh in September of 1968. When his partner, Specialist David Chun, was wounded by a booby trap deep in an enemy tunnel complex, Yates used his M1911A1 to fight off a counterattack while dragging the unconscious soldier to safety. The action required Yates to fire all 7 rounds in his magazine plus his spare magazine, accounting for 14 confirmed enemy casualties in close-quarters combat. "I wasn't thinking about the history of the gun or its technical specifications," Yates recalled. "I was thinking about getting Chun out of that hole alive. But I can tell you that every one of those 14 rounds did exactly what it was supposed to do. The 45 just doesn't leave any doubt about the outcome." The Viet Cong response to American tunnel clearing operations included increasingly sophisticated countermeasures designed to neutralize the effectiveness of small arms fire in confined spaces. Booby traps ranged from simple punji stakes to complex explosive devices triggered by tripwires. Some tunnels were flooded with water to make movement difficult, while others were filled with tear gas or other chemical agents. Perhaps the most psychologically disturbing countermeasure was the use of tethered venomous snakes, cobras, and bamboo vipers that were chained in strategic locations to attack intruders. For soldiers already operating at the edge of psychological endurance, the additional threat of poisonous snakes turned an already terrifying mission into a nightmare of multiple simultaneous dangers. Against these threats, the M1911A1 represented more than just firepower. It was a psychological anchor that provided confidence and reassurance in an environment where both were in short supply. The weight of the loaded pistol in a soldier's hand, the familiar feel of the grip safety and manual safety, and the knowledge that 7 rounds of proven stopping power were available on demand provided a crucial edge in maintaining mental stability under extreme stress. The distinctive manual of arms of the M1911A1 also proved advantageous in tunnel operations. Unlike double-action revolvers or other pistol designs that required different trigger pressures for first and subsequent shots, the single-action mechanism of the 1911 provided consistent trigger pull and predictable performance. In situations where a soldier might have only one opportunity to fire an accurate shot, this consistency was literally a matter of life and death. Technical Sergeant William Brooks of the 9th Infantry Division developed specialized tactics for tunnel combat that maximized the M1911A1's effectiveness. His techniques included using the pistol's manual safety as a positioning reference in complete darkness, employing the grip safety as a dead man's switch during movement, and using the slide stop as a tactile indicator for ammunition status without visual confirmation. "In those tunnels, you couldn't see your hand in front of your face," Brooks explained. "Everything had to be done by feel and sound. The 1911 was perfect for that because every control was big enough and positive enough that you could operate it with gloves on, in the dark, while scared out of your mind." Brooks's innovations were adopted by tunnel rat units throughout South Vietnam, creating an informal doctrine for pistol employment in underground combat. These techniques included specific ready positions for movement through narrow passages, methods for reloading in confined spaces, and tactics for engaging multiple targets in small chambers. The effectiveness of these methods was demonstrated during Operation Junction City, a major search and destroy mission in War Zone C during February and March of 1967. Tunnel rats armed with M1911A1 pistols cleared over 50 miles of enemy tunnels, recovering thousands of weapons, tons of ammunition, and intelligence materials that revealed the full scope of Viet Cong operations in the region. But the human stories behind these statistics revealed the true measure of the pistol's contribution to American operations in Vietnam. Private First Class Robert Baumann of the 4th Infantry Division credited his M1911A1 with saving his life during a tunnel encounter near Pleiku in August of 1968. Surprised by 3 Viet Cong soldiers in an underground junction, Baumann fired 5 shots in less than 3 seconds, accounting for all 3 enemy fighters at a range of less than 10 feet. "People ask me how I managed to fire that fast and that accurate in a situation like that," Baumann said. "The answer is that I didn't manage it, the gun did. All I had to do was point it and pull the trigger. The 1911 took care of the rest." The technical reliability that Baumann described was the product of 6 decades of design refinement and field testing. John Moses Browning's original design had incorporated features that proved remarkably well suited to the demands of tunnel warfare. The pistol's short recoil operating system functioned reliably even when the gun was held at unusual angles or partially obstructed by tunnel walls. The feed system worked consistently with the original 7-round magazines, even when those magazines had been loaded and unloaded hundreds of times during extended operations. Perhaps most importantly, The M1911A1's field stripping procedure was simple enough to be performed in complete darkness with minimal tools. This capability proved essential for maintaining weapons in the harsh underground environment where moisture, mud, and debris created constant maintenance challenges. The logistics of supporting tunnel rat operations required specialized procedures for ammunition resupply and weapon maintenance. Each tunnel clearing mission required extensive preparation, including the loading of multiple magazines and the careful inspection of every cartridge for defects that might cause malfunctions in critical moments. Master Sergeant Anthony Rodriguez, who supervised tunnel operations for the 1st Cavalry Division, established procedures that became standard throughout American forces in Vietnam. These included mandatory function checks before each mission, standardized load configurations that maximized ammunition availability while minimizing weight, and specific maintenance schedules that ensured weapon reliability under extreme conditions. The thing about tunnel fighting, Rodriguez explained, is that you don't get second chances. If your weapon malfunctions down there, you're not going to have time to clear it and try again. Everything has to work perfectly the first time, every time. The 1911 gave us that kind of reliability. The psychological impact of tunnel warfare on American forces cannot be overstated. The combination of claustrophobic conditions, constant danger, and the knowledge that death might be waiting around the next corner created stress levels that challenged even the most experienced soldiers. In this environment, the M1911A1 served not just as a weapon, but as a crucial psychological support that helped maintain fighting effectiveness under extreme conditions. Dr. Patricia Williams, a military psychiatrist who studied combat stress reactions during the Vietnam conflict, identified the M1911A1 as a significant factor in maintaining morale among tunnel rats. The soldiers consistently mentioned the reliability and stopping power of their pistols as sources of confidence, she noted. In an environment where so much was uncertain and dangerous, the predictable performance of their weapons provided a crucial psychological anchor. This psychological dimension of the pistol's effectiveness was perhaps most clearly demonstrated during the siege of Khe Sanh in early 1968, when Marines of the 3rd Marine Division used their M1911A1 pistols not just for tunnel clearing, but for perimeter defense during the most sustained bombardment American forces had faced since the Korean War. The knowledge that each Marine carried 7 rounds of proven stopping power provided reassurance during moments when the base's survival seemed doubtful. As 1968 drew to a close and American involvement in Vietnam approached its peak, the tunnel rats and their aging pistols had fundamentally altered the underground war in South Vietnam. Enemy tunnel systems that had been considered impregnable were systematically cleared and destroyed, denying the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese Army crucial staging areas and supply routes. The success of tunnel operations also demonstrated the continuing relevance of close-quarters combat skills in an era increasingly dominated by technology and firepower. While B-52 bombers dropped thousands of tons of explosives on suspected tunnel entrances, it was individual soldiers armed with 60-year-old pistols who ultimately cleared the enemy from their underground strongholds. But the cost of this success was measured in American casualties and psychological trauma that would affect the survivors for decades. The tunnel rats who emerged from the underground war carried with them not just the physical scars of wounds and injuries, but the psychological burden of having fought a war that challenged every assumption about modern combat. Their weapon, the M1911A1, had proven that some technologies transcend their era. In the most technologically advanced war in human history, featuring helicopter assaults, precision-guided munitions, and satellite communications, victory in the underground war still came down to individual soldiers armed with a pistol design that predated powered flight. The steel was old, but in the darkness beneath Vietnam, it had spoken with a voice that would not be denied. While American forces descended into Vietnamese tunnels armed with their aging M1911A1 pistols, their Australian allies made a different choice that would spark decades of debate about pistol effectiveness in combat. The Australian and New Zealand Army Corps, ANZAC, forces deployed to Vietnam carried the Browning high-power, a 13-round, 9mm pistol that represented a radically different philosophy of sidearm employment. The decision to equip Australian forces with the Browning high-power, officially designated the L9 pistol in Commonwealth service, was made long before the first Australian military advisors arrived in South Vietnam in August of 1962. The pistol had been adopted by British and Commonwealth forces in the 1930s as part of a broader standardization program designed to create interoperability between allied nations. But in the jungles and rice paddies of Vietnam, the differences between the American .45 and the Australian 9mm would be measured not in technical specifications, but in combat effectiveness under conditions that neither weapon had been designed to face. Major William Patterson of the Royal Australian Regiment was among the first Australian officers to engage Viet Cong forces in combat while armed with the Browning High Power. During a patrol action near Phuoc Thi Province in September of 1966, Patterson's unit was ambushed by a numerically superior enemy force in dense jungle that reduced engagement ranges to less than 20 meters. The high power gave us options that the American .45 simply couldn't match, Patterson recalled. 13 rounds in the magazine meant we could engage multiple targets without reloading, and the 9mm ammunition was light enough that we could carry substantially more rounds than our American counterparts. The technical specifications of the Browning High Power reflected John Moses Browning's evolution in pistol design from his earlier M1911 creation. The High Power measured 7.75 inches in overall length compared to the M1911A1's 8.5 inches, and weighed 2.2 pounds loaded compared to the American pistol's 3 pounds. More significantly, the High Power's double-stack magazine held 13 rounds of 9mm ammunition compared to the M1911A1's 7 rounds of .45 ACP. The 9mm parabellum cartridge fired by the High Power represented a fundamentally different approach to handgun ballistics than the American .45 ACP. The standard military load featured a 115-grain full metal jacket bullet traveling at approximately 1,200 feet per second, compared to the .45's 230-grain bullet at 830 feet per second. This meant that the 9mm delivered its effectiveness through velocity and penetration rather than mass and diameter. The smaller, faster bullet could penetrate light cover and equipment more effectively than the .45, but delivered less stopping power against unprotected human targets. The trade-off between stopping power and penetration would prove crucial in the varied combat environments of Vietnam. Captain James Morrison of the 6th Battalion, Royal Australian Regiment, experienced this trade-off firsthand during the Battle of Long Tan on August 18, 1966, when his company was surrounded by a reinforced Viet Cong regiment during a reconnaissance patrol. Morrison used his high power to engage enemy soldiers who had penetrated to within 10 meters of his position. The 9mm rounds punched through the bamboo and vegetation that would have stopped a .45, Morrison observed. But it took multiple hits to put enemy soldiers down definitively. The Americans with their .45s were dropping people with single shots, while we often needed 2 or 3 rounds to achieve the same effect. The Battle of Long Tan became the most significant engagement fought by Australian forces during the Vietnam conflict, and it provided crucial data on the comparative effectiveness of different small arms in jungle warfare. The battle pitted 108 soldiers of Delta Company, 6th Battalion, Royal Australian Regiment against an estimated 2,000 Viet Cong and North Vietnamese Army troops in a rubber plantation during a tropical thunderstorm. The engagement lasted for nearly 4 hours and involved close-quarters combat where pistols played a crucial role in determining the outcome. Australian soldiers armed with high-power pistols engaged enemy forces at ranges as close as 5 meters, while artillery support and helicopter gunships provided fire support that prevented complete encirclement. Sergeant Michael Thompson, who was wounded 3 times during the battle, credited his high power with enabling him to continue fighting despite his injuries. When you're hit and can't handle your rifle effectively, having 13 rounds in your pistol makes a hell of a difference, he explained. I went through 2 full magazines during that fight, and if I'd been carrying a 7-shot gun, I probably wouldn't have made it out. The Australian experience with the high power in Vietnam was influenced by their unique approach to jungle warfare tactics. Australian forces had gained extensive experience in counterinsurgency operations during the Malayan Emergency from 1948 to 1960, and they brought specialized skills to Vietnam that complemented their choice of sidearm. Unlike American forces, who often operated in large units with substantial fire support, Australian forces typically conducted small unit patrols and reconnaissance missions that emphasized stealth and precision over firepower. In these operations, The high power's lighter weight and increased ammunition capacity provided tactical advantages that outweighed the reduced stopping power compared to the American .45. Lieutenant Colonel Colin Kahn, who commanded Australian Special Operations in Vietnam from 1967 to 1968, developed specialized tactics that maximized the high power's effectiveness in jungle combat. These techniques included rapid magazine changes under fire, precision shooting at extended ranges, and coordinated fire with multiple pistol-armed soldiers engaging the same target. The high power wasn't just a backup weapon for us, Kahn explained. It was an integral part of our fighting system. We trained extensively with it, developed specialized ammunition loads, and integrated it into our small unit tactics in ways that most armies never considered. The ammunition considerations for the high power were particularly important in Vietnam's logistics environment. 9mm ammunition was lighter and more compact than .45 ACP, allowing soldiers to carry more rounds for the same weight penalty. A standard load of 50 rounds of 9mm ammunition weighed approximately 2 pounds, compared to nearly 4 pounds for the same number of .45 ACP rounds. This weight advantage was multiplied across an entire unit. An Australian rifle company armed with high-power pistols could carry approximately twice as much pistol ammunition as a comparable American unit armed with M1911A1's, providing greater sustained firepower in extended engagements. The Australian experience also revealed the importance of training and familiarity with sidearm employment. While American forces typically received minimal training with their pistols, focusing primarily on rifle marksmanship, Australian forces emphasized pistol proficiency as a core military skill. This difference in training philosophy was reflected in combat effectiveness. Australian units consistently reported higher hit ratios and more effective employment of their pistols in combat situations. The combination of better training, lighter ammunition, and increased magazine capacity created a synergistic effect that enhanced overall combat capability. Major David Sabin of the 3rd Battalion, Royal Australian Regiment, observed this difference during joint operations with American forces. The Americans had a more powerful pistol, but they didn't know how to use it effectively, he noted. We had a less powerful pistol, but we could employ it with precision and confidence. In most combat situations, skill trumped raw power. The technical reliability of the high power in Vietnam's harsh environment was generally excellent, though different from the legendary durability of the M1911A1. The high power's more complex mechanism required more frequent maintenance, but its modern manufacturing tolerances made it less susceptible to fouling from mud and debris. Australian Armour Warrant Officer Peter Williams, who maintained high-power pistols throughout the Vietnam conflict, developed specialized cleaning procedures that maximized weapon reliability in tropical conditions. These procedures included daily inspection and cleaning, specialized lubricants designed for high-humidity environments, and replacement schedules for springs and other wear items that exceeded manufacturer recommendations. The high power was a more sophisticated weapon than the American .45, Williams explained. It required more care and attention, but in return it gave us capabilities that the older pistol couldn't match. It was a fair trade-off, especially considering how we employed our pistols in combat. The psychological aspects of carrying the high power were notably different from the American experience with the M1911A1. While American soldiers often viewed their pistols as symbols of American military tradition and stopping power, Australian soldiers saw the high power as a modern, efficient tool that reflected their professional approach to warfare. This difference in perception was reflected in how the weapons were employed tactically. American forces often relied on the M1911A1's intimidation factor and stopping power to end engagements quickly, while Australian forces used the high power's accuracy and magazine capacity to maintain sustained fire and achieve tactical objectives through precision rather than raw power. The effectiveness of these different approaches was difficult to measure quantitatively, but qualitative assessments from both sides suggested that each weapon was well suited to its user's tactical philosophy. American tunnel fighters needed the stopping power of the .45 to end encounters in confined spaces, while Australian jungle fighters needed the sustained firepower of the 9mm to maintain effectiveness during extended patrol operations. The logistics of supporting Australian forces with 9mm ammunition created interesting challenges for American supply operations. While the Australian Defence Force maintained its own supply chain for specialized equipment, 9mm ammunition was also used by various American Special Operations units, creating opportunities for coordination and mutual support. This ammunition commonality proved valuable during joint operations between Australian and American Special Forces. Units like the U.S. Navy SEALs and Army Special Forces, which often used captured or non-standard weapons, could share ammunition with Australian units when operating in the same areas. Captain Robert Harrison of the U.S. Navy SEALs recalled one instance where ammunition sharing proved crucial to mission success. "We were operating with an Australian SAS unit near the Cambodian border, and our supply drop got compromised," he explained. "The Aussies shared their 9mm ammunition with us, and we were able to complete the mission using their high-power pistols." It was a good reminder that interoperability isn't just about radio frequencies and map coordinates. The Australian experience with the high power also provided valuable data on the effectiveness of different pistol cartridges against various types of targets encountered in Vietnam. 9mm ammunition proved particularly effective against lightly equipped enemy forces, but was less effective against heavily clothed enemies or those wearing any form of body protection. This limitation became apparent during cold weather operations in the Highlands, where enemy soldiers often wore multiple layers of clothing that could reduce the effectiveness of 9mm rounds. Australian forces operating in these conditions sometimes supplemented their high-power pistols with captured weapons or requested access to larger caliber firearms for specific missions. The comparative analysis of high-power effectiveness versus M1911A1 effectiveness was complicated by the different tactical environments in which each weapon was employed. Australian forces primarily operated in areas with lighter enemy resistance, while American forces often engaged larger, better-equipped enemy units in more intense combat situations. However, when direct comparisons were possible, both weapons proved effective within their design parameters. The high power excelled in situations requiring sustained fire or engagement of multiple targets, while the M1911A1 dominated in close-quarters encounters where stopping power was paramount. By 1969, as Australian troop strength in Vietnam approached its peak of over 8,000 personnel, the high power had established itself as a reliable and effective sidearm for Commonwealth forces. The weapon's combination of accuracy, reliability, and magazine capacity had proven well suited to Australian tactical requirements and training philosophy. The success of the high power in Vietnam also influenced post-war pistol development and procurement decisions. The weapon's demonstrated effectiveness led to its continued use by Australian forces for decades after the Vietnam conflict ended, and its influence can be seen in modern pistol designs that emphasize magazine capacity and accuracy over raw stopping power. Perhaps most significantly, the Australian experience with the high power demonstrated that there was no single best pistol for combat operations. The effectiveness of any sidearm depended heavily on the tactical situation, user training, and logistical considerations that varied significantly between different military forces and operational environments. The steel may have been newer than the American .45, but in the hands of well-trained Australian soldiers, the high power proved that modern engineering and tactical innovation could be just as effective as traditional stopping power and proven reliability. The Republic of Korea (ROK) forces that deployed to Vietnam brought with them a different perspective on both warfare and weaponry that had been forged in the crucible of their own national survival. From 1965 to 1973, over 300,000 South Korean soldiers served in Vietnam, making them the second largest foreign military contingent after the United States. Their approach to sidearms and close-quarters combat reflected hard-learned lessons from the Korean War and a military culture that emphasized discipline, training, and tactical innovation. The ROK forces in Vietnam were organized into three major formations: the Capital Tiger Division, the 9th White Horse Infantry Division, and the 2nd Marine Blue Dragon Brigade. Each unit brought its own traditions and equipment preferences, but all shared a common foundation in American military doctrine and weaponry that had been adapted to Korean tactical requirements. Major General Chai Myung-shin, who commanded ROK forces in Vietnam from 1965 to 1969, understood that his soldiers' effectiveness would depend not just on their equipment, but on their ability to adapt American weapons and tactics to Vietnamese conditions. "Our soldiers had learned in Korea that superior equipment means nothing without superior training and discipline," he observed. In Vietnam, we would prove this lesson again. The primary sidearm for ROK forces was the same M1911A1 carried by American troops, but Korean soldiers brought a different approach to pistol training and employment that reflected their military culture's emphasis on marksmanship and individual weapon proficiency. Where American forces often treated the pistol as a backup weapon, Korean forces integrated it into their standard fighting doctrine as a primary tool for specific tactical situations. Colonel Park Chung-hee, not to be confused with the future president, of the Tiger Division established training standards for pistol marksmanship that exceeded American requirements and incorporated techniques developed during the Korean War. These standards included precision shooting at extended ranges, rapid engagement of multiple targets, and specialized techniques for night fighting and close-quarters combat. The American soldiers were brave and well-equipped, but they often relied too heavily on firepower to solve tactical problems, Colonel Park explained. Our soldiers learned to use precision and discipline to achieve the same objectives with less expenditure of ammunition and lower casualty rates. This philosophical difference was reflected in combat effectiveness statistics. ROK forces consistently reported higher hit ratios with their pistols and achieved tactical objectives with lower ammunition expenditure than comparable American units. The difference was attributed to superior training standards and a military culture that emphasized individual marksmanship skills. The Korean approach to pistol employment was demonstrated during Operation Masher in January and February of 1966, when elements of the Tiger Division were tasked with clearing Viet Cong forces from the Binh Dinh province. During this operation, Korean soldiers armed with M1911A1 pistols engaged enemy forces in close-quarters combat in villages and underground positions. Sergeant Major Kim Sung-ho of the Tiger Division accounted for 7 confirmed enemy casualties using only his M1911A1 during a single engagement near Kanan. The action occurred when Kim's patrol was ambushed in a village market, and rifle-length weapons proved impractical in the confined space between market stalls. The .45 gave me the power to end each engagement with single shots, Kim recalled. But the key was not the weapon, it was the training that allowed me to place each shot precisely where it would be most effective. The pistol was only as good as the soldier who carried it. Kim's experience was typical of ROK forces' approach to combat in Vietnam. Korean soldiers were trained to view their pistols not as last resort weapons, but as precision instruments that could be employed effectively at ranges and in situations where rifles were impractical or ineffective. The technical modifications made to M1911A1 pistols by Korean armorers reflected this precision-oriented approach. Many Korean units replaced the standard sights with more precise adjustable sights, modified triggers for improved accuracy, and implemented maintenance procedures that kept weapons in peak condition despite the harsh Vietnamese environment. Master Sergeant Lee Min-ho, who served as an armorer for the White Horse Division, developed specialized techniques for maintaining M1911A1 pistols in tropical conditions. His procedures included daily cleaning and inspection, specialized lubricants, and replacement schedules for wear items that exceeded both American and manufacturer recommendations. We treated our pistols like precision instruments because that's what they were in our hands, Lee explained. The American approach was to maintain them as reliable tools, which was adequate for their needs. But we needed maximum precision and reliability, which required a higher level of care and attention. The Korean emphasis on pistol proficiency was also reflected in their training ammunition allocation. While American units typically received minimal pistol ammunition for training purposes, Korean units allocated substantial quantities for regular marksmanship practice and tactical exercises. This training investment paid dividends in combat effectiveness. Korean soldiers consistently demonstrated superior pistol marksmanship compared to their American counterparts, and ROK units reported fewer instances of pistol malfunctions or maintenance problems despite operating in the same environmental conditions. The psychological aspects of pistol employment were also different for Korean forces. While American soldiers often viewed the M1911A1 as a symbol of American military tradition, Korean soldiers saw it as a tool that required mastery to be effective. This difference in perception translated into different training priorities and combat employment techniques. Captain Roh Tae-woo of the Blue Dragon Brigade, who would later become president of South Korea, observed this difference during joint operations with American forces. The Americans respected their pistols because of their history and reputation, he noted. We respected our pistols because of what we could accomplish with them through proper training and discipline. The tactical employment of pistols by Korean forces also differed from American practices. While American forces often used pistols defensively in response to unexpected close-quarters encounters, Korean forces incorporated pistol employment into their offensive tactical plans. This proactive approach was demonstrated during the Battle of Tra Bin Dong in February of 1967, when elements of the White Horse Division used coordinated pistol fire to suppress enemy positions during an assault on a fortified village. The precision shooting capabilities of Korean soldiers allowed them to engage specific targets with pistols while their rifle-armed comrades maneuvered to assault positions. The effectiveness of this tactic surprised both American advisors and enemy forces, who had not expected pistol fire to be used as a suppressive fire tool. The Korean ability to deliver accurate pistol fire at ranges up to 50 meters provided tactical flexibility that enhanced overall unit effectiveness. Lieutenant Colonel Paik Sun-yup of the Tiger Division, who had previously commanded Korean forces during the Korean War, understood the importance of adapting tactics to available weapons. In Korea, we learned that American weapons could be more effective in Korean hands if we modified our tactics to maximize their strengths, he explained. In Vietnam, we applied the same principle to achieve superior results with the same equipment used by American forces. The logistical support for Korean pistol operations required coordination between Korean and American supply systems. While Korean forces used the same M1911A1 pistols and 45 ACP ammunition as American troops, they consumed ammunition at different rates due to their emphasis on training and precision shooting. This difference in consumption patterns sometimes created supply challenges, particularly for specialized items like match-grade ammunition and precision sights. Korean forces often had to rely on their own supply chains for specialized equipment while depending on American logistics for standard items like basic ammunition and replacement parts. The maintenance philosophy employed by Korean forces also created unique requirements for spare parts and specialized tools. The Korean emphasis on precision and reliability meant that weapons were often rebuilt or modified to standards that exceeded original specifications, requiring parts and materials that were not always available through standard American supply channels. Despite these challenges, the logistics partnership between Korean and American forces generally worked effectively. The shared use of common weapons and ammunition simplified many aspects of supply and maintenance, while the Korean emphasis on self-sufficiency reduced demands on American logistics resources. The combat effectiveness of Korean forces armed with M1911A1 pistols was reflected in their casualty statistics and tactical achievements. Korean units consistently achieved tactical objectives with lower casualty rates than comparable American units, and their superior marksmanship was noted by both American advisors and enemy forces. This effectiveness was particularly notable in urban combat situations where precision shooting was essential to avoid civilian casualties. Korean soldiers' ability to engage specific targets with pistol fire at moderate ranges allowed them to neutralize threats without the collateral damage often associated with rifle or automatic weapons fire. The Korean experience in Vietnam also provided valuable lessons about the importance of training and discipline in maximizing weapon effectiveness. The same M1911A1 pistol that served adequately in American hands became a precision instrument when employed by well-trained Korean soldiers who understood its capabilities and limitations. Major General Che's assessment of Korean pistol employment in Vietnam emphasized this point. The weapon is only as effective as the soldier who carries it. Superior training and discipline can make any weapon more effective, while poor training can render even the finest weapon useless. The psychological impact of Korean pistol proficiency extended beyond its direct military effectiveness. Enemy forces learned to respect the marksmanship capabilities of Korean soldiers, and this reputation enhanced the psychological warfare value of Korean operations. Captured enemy documents recovered during Operation Junction City in 1967 included specific references to Korean marksmanship abilities and recommended tactics for avoiding engagement with Korean forces. These documents indicated that enemy forces had identified Korean pistol proficiency as a significant tactical threat. The Korean approach to pistol training also influenced American practices in some units. American officers who observed Korean training methods sometimes incorporated them into their own unit training programs, leading to improved pistol proficiency among American soldiers. Colonel William Depew, who commanded the 1st Infantry Division during part of the Vietnam conflict, noted the value of Korean training methods. The Koreans showed us that the same weapons we were using could be more effective with better training. Their approach to pistol marksmanship was something we could learn from. As Korean forces began withdrawing from Vietnam in 1972, their legacy included not just their combat achievements but their demonstration of how training and discipline could maximize the effectiveness of standard military equipment. The Korean experience with the M1911A1 in Vietnam proved that weapon effectiveness was determined as much by the user as by the weapon itself. The steel was the same, but in Korean hands, it achieved a level of precision and effectiveness that demonstrated the continuing relevance of marksmanship skills in modern warfare. In a small workshop hidden beneath the village of Ben Tre in the Mekong Delta, 60-year-old craftsman Nguyen Van Duc worked by candlelight to create something that should have been impossible: a functional copy of the American M1911A1 pistol using nothing but hand tools, scrap metal, and decades of experience as a traditional gunsmith. The year was 1966, and Duc was one of dozens of Vietnamese craftsmen who had been tasked with reverse engineering captured American weapons to arm Viet Cong forces who could not rely on supplies from North Vietnam. The pistol that emerged from Duc's workshop bore the crude stamping, made in MINA/No-151-28-7-1966, marking it as the 151st pistol produced in his workshop during July of 1966. Despite its crude appearance and rough finish, this homemade copy of Browning's masterpiece would fire the same 45 ACP cartridges as the original and deliver nearly identical terminal ballistics, a testament to both the brilliance of the original design and the ingenuity of Vietnamese craftsmen working under impossible conditions. "The Americans brought us many gifts," Duc later told Communist Party officials. "But the most valuable gift was their pistol. It showed us that even with simple tools and limited materials, we could create weapons that would serve our cause." The story of captured and copied American weapons in Vietnam reflects one of the war's most overlooked aspects: the enemy's constant adaptation and innovation in response to superior American firepower and technology. While North Vietnamese and Viet Cong forces received substantial supplies of modern weapons from China and the Soviet Union, captured American weapons provided both practical firepower and powerful psychological warfare tools. The M1911A1 was particularly prized by enemy forces for several reasons. Its robust design made it less susceptible to maintenance problems than more complex weapons. Its powerful cartridge was effective against both personnel and light equipment, and its psychological impact on American forces was significant when turned against its former users. Captain Nguyen Van Thai of the North Vietnamese Army, who commanded a sapper unit that specialized in infiltrating American bases, understood the value of captured American weapons. When American soldiers heard the sound of their own .45 being fired at them, it created confusion and fear, he explained. They did not know if the shots were coming from their own forces or from us. The process of capturing American weapons was systematically organized by both Viet Cong and North Vietnamese forces. Specialized units were trained to recover weapons from battlefield casualties, abandoned equipment, and overrun positions. Priority was given to crew-served weapons and automatic rifles, but pistols were also highly valued due to their utility in close-quarters operations and assassination missions. The technical challenge of copying the M1911A1 was substantial. The pistol's complex mechanism required precise manufacturing tolerances and specialized materials that were not readily available in rural Vietnam. However, Vietnamese craftsmen brought centuries of metalworking tradition and wartime necessity that drove innovation and problem-solving. Master craftsman Lu Van Minh, who operated a weapons workshop near Siu Chi from 1965 to 1969, described the process. "We would completely disassemble captured pistols and measure every component. Then we would create wooden templates and use those to forge new parts from scrap steel. The most difficult challenge was creating the springs, which required special steel and precise heat treatment. The quality of these homemade copies varied significantly depending on the skill of the craftsman and the availability of materials. The best examples, produced by experienced gunsmiths using captured parts and high-quality steel, were nearly indistinguishable from original American pistols in terms of function and reliability. The worst examples were crude single-shot weapons that only superficially resembled the original design. Despite these variations in quality, even the crudest copies served important purposes in the Communist war effort. They provided firepower for forces that might otherwise have been unarmed. They demonstrated the technical capabilities of Vietnamese craftsmen, and they created psychological pressure on American forces who knew that their own weapons might be turned against them. The ammunition situation for captured and copied American pistols presented unique logistical challenges. While 45 ACP cartridges could sometimes be captured along with the weapons, sustained operations required either local ammunition production or complex supply arrangements with outside sources. Some Vietnamese workshops developed the capability to reload captured cartridge cases using locally produced gunpowder and lead bullets. The quality of this ammunition was generally inferior to American production, but it was sufficient for most combat applications and represented a significant logistical achievement under wartime conditions. Senior Colonel Vo Nguyen Giap, the legendary North Vietnamese military strategist, recognized the strategic value of captured American weapons in a broader context. Every American weapon we captured represented not just additional firepower, but proof that the enemy could be defeated. When our soldiers carried American pistols, they carried confidence that American technology could serve Vietnamese independence. The psychological warfare aspects of using captured American weapons were carefully exploited by Communist forces. Pistols captured from American officers were often used in propaganda photographs and films to demonstrate Communist military success. The visual impact of Vietnamese soldiers armed with American weapons reinforced the message that the United States could not achieve victory in Vietnam. The technical analysis of captured American pistols also provided valuable intelligence about American manufacturing capabilities and military procedures. Vietnamese technicians learned to identify different manufacturers, production dates, and service histories from markings and wear patterns on captured weapons. This intelligence was used to assess American logistics capabilities, identify unit deployments, and understand equipment replacement cycles. The information gathered from captured weapons supplemented other intelligence sources and contributed to strategic planning decisions at the highest levels of the North Vietnamese command structure. Colonel Bui Tin, who served as a North Vietnamese intelligence officer throughout the conflict, described the intelligence value of captured weapons. Each pistol told a story about American forces, where they had been, how long they had been in service, and what units were operating in different areas. This information helped us understand American capabilities and planned our operations accordingly. The distribution of captured American weapons within Communist forces followed strict hierarchical patterns. The highest quality pistols were typically allocated to senior officers and specialized units, while lower quality copies were distributed to local forces and militia units. This distribution system ensured that the most reliable weapons were available for critical missions while still providing some level of standardized equipment to all forces. The training required to effectively employ captured American weapons was provided through specialized schools operated by both North Vietnamese and Viet Cong forces. These schools taught not just basic operation and maintenance, but also tactical employment techniques that maximized the effectiveness of American weapons in Vietnamese hands. Instructor Tran Van Ba, who taught weapons familiarization at a training facility near the Ho Chi Minh Trail, emphasized the importance of understanding American tactical doctrine. To use American weapons effectively against Americans, we had to understand how Americans used these weapons. We studied captured manuals, interviewed prisoners, and observed American tactics to learn their strengths and weaknesses. The maintenance of captured American weapons presented ongoing challenges for Communist forces. While the M1911A1 was relatively simple to maintain, the lack of proper lubricants, cleaning supplies, and replacement parts created problems that required innovative solutions. Vietnamese armorers developed substitute lubricants using local materials, created improvised cleaning tools, and learned to manufacture critical replacement parts using captured weapons as templates. These adaptations often exceeded the original specifications for durability and reliability, reflecting the Vietnamese emphasis on making do with available resources. The combat effectiveness of captured and copied American pistols in Vietnamese hands was generally high, though specific performance data is limited due to the secretive nature of Communist military operations. However, American after-action reports from the period include numerous references to effective enemy use of captured American weapons. One particularly detailed account comes from the Battle for Firebase Charlie in March of 1968, where American forces reported being engaged by enemy soldiers armed with M1911A1 pistols at extremely close range. The accuracy and stopping power demonstrated by the Vietnamese soldiers suggested thorough familiarity with the weapons and extensive training in their employment. The strategic implications of captured American weapons extended beyond their immediate military value. The successful copying and employment of American weapons demonstrated Vietnamese technical capabilities and reinforced the narrative that the United States was not facing a primitive guerrilla force, but a sophisticated enemy capable of matching American technology and tactics. This demonstration of technical competence had important implications for international opinion and diplomatic efforts. Countries that might have viewed North Vietnam as a backward agricultural society were forced to reassess their assumptions when presented with evidence of sophisticated weapon production and reverse engineering capabilities. The economic aspects of weapon copying also provided significant benefits to the Communist war effort. Each locally produced pistol represented savings in transportation costs, reduced dependence on external suppliers, and creation of local employment in weapons production. These economic benefits complemented the direct military advantages of increased firepower. The scale of American weapon copying and production is difficult to assess precisely, but captured communist documents suggest that dozens of workshops throughout South Vietnam and along the Ho Chi Minh Trail were engaged in weapons production and modification. The total output of these facilities may have reached thousands of weapons over the course of the conflict. Perhaps most significantly, the success of copying American weapons influenced post-war Vietnamese military development. The technical skills and manufacturing capabilities developed during the wartime copying programs provided a foundation for indigenous weapons production that continued long after American forces withdrew from Vietnam. The psychological impact on American forces of facing their own weapons in enemy hands cannot be understated. The distinctive sound of a .45 ACP cartridge being fired created confusion in combat situations where soldiers had to determine whether the shots were coming from friendly or enemy forces. This confusion was deliberately exploited by communist forces, who sometimes used captured American weapons to create false impressions about the location and strength of American units. The tactic was particularly effective during night operations and in dense jungle where visual identification was impossible. The intelligence value of studying captured American weapons also extended to understanding American military doctrine and training. By analyzing the wear patterns, modifications, and maintenance practices evident on captured weapons, Vietnamese intelligence officers could draw conclusions about American training standards, operational procedures, and equipment policies. This intelligence was used to develop counter-tactics and to identify weaknesses in American procedures that could be exploited. The information gathered from captured weapons complemented other intelligence sources and contributed to the overall Vietnamese understanding of American military capabilities. As the conflict progressed and American casualties mounted, the number of weapons available for capture increased dramatically. Major battles like the Tet Offensive of 1968 resulted in the capture of substantial quantities of American equipment, including hundreds of M1911A1 pistols. The distribution of these captured weapons throughout communist forces provided a significant boost to their firepower and demonstrated the practical benefits of successful military operations. The sight of Vietnamese soldiers armed with American weapons served as powerful propaganda that reinforced the message that American forces could be defeated. The technical lessons learned from copying American weapons also influenced the development of indigenous Vietnamese weapons designs. The manufacturing techniques, quality control procedures, and testing protocols developed during the copying programs provided a foundation for original weapon development that continued after the war ended. By 1975, when North Vietnamese forces entered Saigon to end the conflict, captured and copied American weapons had played a significant role in the communist victory. The pistols that began as symbols of American military power had been transformed into tools of Vietnamese independence, demonstrating once again that in warfare, the most dangerous enemy is one who learns from your successes and turns them against you. The steel was American, but the hands that wielded it had learned to use it in ways its designers never intended. The morning of July 18, 1966, began like countless others for Staff Sergeant John McGinty of Kilo Company, 3rd Battalion, 4th Marine Regiment. But by afternoon, McGinty would find himself leading an understrength platoon of 32 Marines against a regimental-sized North Vietnamese Army force supported by mortar fire, and the M1911A1 pistol on his hip would become the difference between life and death for Marines who had no other options left. When the shit hit the fan at Landing Zone Crow, McGinty recalled decades later, I wasn't thinking about the history of my 45 or its technical specifications. I was thinking about keeping my boys alive, and that old pistol gave me 7 chances to make that happen. The engagement that would earn McGinty the Medal of Honor began when his platoon was tasked with covering the withdrawal of 3rd Battalion following Phase 1 of Operation Hastings. The North Vietnamese hoped to overrun Landing Zone Crow and prevent the American withdrawal, committing nearly 2,000 troops to what they expected to be a decisive engagement. Within minutes of first contact, the situation deteriorated into what McGinty described as controlled chaos. Enemy mortar fire had wounded 20 of his 32 Marines, including the corpsmen, and North Vietnamese infantry were advancing to within 50 meters of the Marine positions. My M16 jammed during the first exchange of fire, McGinty explained. Rifle-length weapons were getting hung up on the vegetation, and the enemy was closing fast. That's when the 45 became my primary weapon instead of my backup. McGinty's experience illustrates the crucial role that pistols played in close-quarters combat throughout the Vietnam conflict. While rifles and machine guns provided the primary firepower for most engagements, there were countless situations where only a pistol could be effectively employed. The tactical situation at Landing Zone Crow deteriorated rapidly as North Vietnamese forces penetrated the Marine perimeter. McGinty found himself engaging enemy soldiers at ranges as close as 10 meters, where the stopping power of the 45 ACP cartridge proved decisive. I put 4 rounds into the first NVA soldier I encountered at close range, McGinty recalled. The 230-grain bullets dropped him immediately, and the sound of that 45 firing let my Marines know exactly where I was and that I was still in the fight. The psychological aspects of pistol employment in close combat were as important as the physical effectiveness of the weapon. The distinctive report of an M1911A1 firing provided instant identification for friendly forces, while the weapon's reputation for reliability gave users confidence in desperate situations. For McGinty's Marines, pinned down by superior numbers and running low on ammunition, the sound of their sergeant's pistol provided crucial reassurance that leadership was still functioning and resistance was continuing. This psychological dimension of small arms employment often determined the outcome of engagements where morale and determination were as important as firepower. The technical performance of McGinty's pistol during the 6-hour engagement demonstrated the weapon's reliability under extreme conditions. Despite being exposed to mud, moisture, and the constant handling associated with extended combat, the 60-year-old weapon functioned flawlessly throughout the action. I went through both of my magazines twice during that fight, McGinty explained. 14 rounds total, and every single one fired when I pulled the trigger. In a situation like that, weapon reliability isn't just important, it's everything. The ammunition considerations for extended pistol combat were significant factors in determining tactical outcomes. Unlike rifle ammunition, which was typically carried in large quantities, pistol ammunition was limited to what individual soldiers could reasonably carry without compromising their mobility and primary weapon capabilities. McGinty's experience with ammunition management during the Landing Zone Crow engagement became a case study in pistol employment for Marines throughout Vietnam. His decision to conserve ammunition by engaging only the most immediate threats, combined with precise shot placement that maximized the effectiveness of each round, enabled him to maintain effective resistance throughout the extended engagement. You learn real quick that every round has to count, McGinty observed. With only 14 rounds total, I couldn't afford to miss or waste shots on targets that weren't immediate threats. The 45 was powerful enough that I could count on one-shot stops, but only if I put the bullets where they needed to go. The medical aspects of pistol wounds inflicted during the Landing Zone Crow engagement provided valuable data on the terminal ballistics of 45 ACP ammunition in combat. Marine corpsmen who treated wounded North Vietnamese soldiers noted the significant tissue damage caused by the large-diameter, low-velocity bullets. Navy corpsman James Patterson, who survived his wounds during the engagement, described the effectiveness of pistol fire. The guys hit by McGinty's .45 were out of the fight immediately. The wound channels were massive, and the hydrostatic shock seemed to incapacitate targets, even when vital organs weren't directly hit. These observations were consistent with previous combat data on .45 ACP effectiveness, but the landing zone crow engagement provided detailed documentation under controlled conditions that enhanced understanding of pistol ballistics in close combat. The tactical lessons learned from McGinty's experience were incorporated into Marine Corps training programs and distributed throughout Marine units in Vietnam. These lessons emphasized the importance of pistol proficiency, ammunition conservation, and the psychological aspects of small arms employment in close combat. Colonel Robert Modrzejewski, who commanded Kilo Company during the engagement and also received the Medal of Honor for his actions, understood the broader implications. McGinty showed us that the pistol wasn't just a backup weapon, it was a combat multiplier that could determine the outcome of engagements when properly employed by a trained Marine. The individual experiences of soldiers like McGinty were repeated thousands of times throughout the Vietnam conflict, creating a body of combat data that demonstrated the continuing relevance of pistol skills in modern warfare. While the majority of these engagements were not as dramatic or well documented as the landing zone crow action, they collectively established the M1911A1's reputation for reliability and effectiveness. Private First Class David Chun of the 25th Infantry Division experienced this reliability firsthand during a tunnel clearing operation near Siu Chi in September of 1968. When his rifle malfunctioned during an underground engagement, Chen's M1911A1 enabled him to fight his way to the surface against multiple enemy soldiers in complete darkness. "I couldn't see my hand in front of my face down there," Chun recalled. "Everything had to be done by feel and sound. The 1911 was perfect for that because I could operate it entirely by touch, and the muzzle blast lit up the tunnel enough for me to see my targets for split seconds at a time." Chen's experience highlighted the importance of weapon familiarity and training in determining combat effectiveness. His ability to operate the pistol effectively in complete darkness was the result of extensive training and practice with the weapon system, demonstrating the value of thorough preparation for unpredictable combat situations. The psychological trauma associated with close-quarters pistol combat was significant for many veterans, but it was often offset by the confidence that came from surviving desperate situations. Soldiers who had successfully employed their pistols in life or death encounters developed a deep appreciation for the weapon's reliability and effectiveness. Specialist Robert Baumann of the 4th Infantry Division described this psychological dimension. "After you've used your .45 to save your life in a tunnel or bunker, you develop a different relationship with that weapon. It's not just equipment anymore, it's a partner that's proven itself when everything else failed." The technical modifications made to M1911A1 pistols by individual soldiers reflected their confidence in the weapon and desire to maximize its effectiveness. These modifications ranged from simple improvements like better sights or grips to more complex alterations like trigger jobs and barrel modifications. Most modifications were performed by unit armorers or soldiers with mechanical skills, using available materials and improvised tools. While these modifications sometimes voided warranty provisions and violated technical regulations, they were generally tolerated by commanders who understood their value in improving combat effectiveness. Master Sergeant Anthony Rodriguez of the 1st Cavalry Division developed specialized techniques for pistol modification that were adopted by other units throughout Vietnam. His innovations included improved sights for low light conditions, textured grips for better weapon retention, and modified magazines for faster reloading under stress. "The standard pistol was good, but we could make it better," Rodriguez explained. Little improvements in accuracy, reliability, or handling could mean the difference between life and death in combat. As long as the modifications worked and didn't compromise safety, we encouraged soldiers to customize their weapons. The ammunition preferences of combat veterans also reflected their understanding of pistol effectiveness in different tactical situations. While standard military ball ammunition was adequate for most purposes, soldiers sometimes acquired specialized loads like hollow points or semi-wadcutter bullets for specific missions. These specialized rounds were typically obtained through unofficial channels or personal purchase, and their use was generally not sanctioned by military regulations. However, Commanders often overlooked ammunition irregularities when they improved combat effectiveness without creating safety hazards. The logistical challenges of supporting extensive pistol employment in Vietnam required adaptations to standard supply procedures. The increased demand for pistol ammunition, replacement parts, and specialized equipment strained supply systems that had been designed for peacetime training requirements rather than sustained combat operations. Captain James Wilson, who served as a supply officer for the 9th Infantry Division, described these challenges. "We were going through pistol ammunition at rates that nobody had anticipated. Standard allocation formulas didn't account for the intensive close-quarters combat we were experiencing, and we had to constantly adjust our requisitions to meet actual needs. The maintenance requirements for heavily used combat pistols also exceeded peacetime standards and required innovative solutions from unit armorers. The combination of tropical conditions, intensive use, and limited replacement parts created maintenance challenges that tested the skills and resourcefulness of military technicians." Staff Sergeant Michael Thompson, who served as an armorer for the 3rd Marine Division, developed maintenance procedures that extended weapon life and improved reliability under combat conditions. His techniques were documented and distributed to other units, contributing to overall weapon effectiveness throughout Marine forces in Vietnam. "The key was preventive maintenance and attention to detail," Thompson explained. "These pistols had been in service for decades before they got to Vietnam, and they needed extra care to maintain peak performance. But when properly maintained, they were absolutely reliable under the worst conditions." The combat effectiveness of individual soldiers armed with M1911A1 pistols was ultimately determined by the combination of weapon reliability, user training, and tactical situation. The most successful pistol employment occurred when all three factors were optimized, creating synergistic effects that enhanced overall combat capability. The experiences of soldiers like McGinty, Chan, and Baumann demonstrated that the M1911A1 remained a viable combat weapon 60 years after its introduction, provided that users understood its capabilities and limitations. The weapon's continued effectiveness in Vietnam validated John Moses Browning's original design and confirmed that some technologies transcend their era to remain relevant across multiple generations of warfare. As the Vietnam conflict progressed and casualty reports accumulated, the stories of individual soldiers and their pistols became part of the weapon's legend. Each successful engagement added to the M1911A1's reputation and reinforced its status as a proven combat weapon that could be depended upon when lives were at stake. The steel was old, but in the hands of trained soldiers facing life and death situations, it continued to perform exactly as its designer had intended more than half a century earlier. Warrant Officer First Class John Holbrook had never expected to engage enemy ground forces with a pistol from the crew compartment of a UH-1 Huey helicopter. But on a humid July morning in 1967, his brand new M1911A1 became the only weapon standing between his aircrew and capture or death. When his helicopter was hit by enemy fire during a reconnaissance mission and crashed in a contested area near the Cambodian border, Holbrook's sidearm transformed from backup equipment into the primary tool for survival. The role of pistols in helicopter operations during Vietnam was complex and often misunderstood. While door gunners relied on M60 machine guns and crew served weapons for primary firepower, pilots and crew members carried sidearms for emergency situations exactly like the one Holbrook faced when his aircraft went down in enemy territory. "The .45 wasn't much use when you're flying at altitude and speed," Holbrook explained. "But when you're on the ground with a damaged bird and enemy soldiers moving in, that pistol becomes the most important piece of equipment you're carrying." The technical challenges of employing pistols from helicopter platforms were substantial. The noise, vibration, and airflow created by rotor systems made accurate shooting nearly impossible, except in emergency situations where the aircraft was stationary or moving very slowly. Most helicopter pistol employment occurred after aircraft were forced down or during hover operations where precise fire was required. Holbrook's emergency began when his UH-1D Slick took small arms fire during a visual reconnaissance mission over suspected enemy positions. Multiple hits damaged the engine and transmission, forcing an emergency landing in a jungle clearing surrounded by enemy forces. "We got everyone away from the aircraft, but it was obvious we weren't going anywhere until rescue arrived," Holbrook recalled. That's when we saw enemy soldiers moving through the tree line toward our position. I had my 45, the crew chief had his 16, and that was all the firepower we had. The subsequent engagement lasted nearly 30 minutes and demonstrated both the capabilities and limitations of pistol employment in desperate circumstances. Holbrook, who had been a competitive shooter in civilian life, engaged enemy soldiers at ranges up to 100 meters far beyond the normal effective range of a pistol, but within his personal capabilities. I wasn't thinking about maximum effective range or technical specifications, Holbrook explained. I was thinking about keeping those enemy soldiers far enough away that they couldn't overwhelm our position before help arrived. The 45 gave me the reach and stopping power to do that. Holbrook's experience highlighted the importance of individual marksmanship skills in determining pistol effectiveness. His competitive shooting background enabled him to employ the M1911A1 at ranges where most soldiers would have been ineffective, demonstrating that weapon capability was often limited more by user skill than by technical specifications. The psychological aspects of the engagement were equally important. The sound and visual impact of pistol fire from the downed helicopter convinced approaching enemy forces that the Americans were still capable of effective resistance, causing them to advance more cautiously and buying time for rescue operations. Captain Thomas McAndrews, who commanded the rescue operation that eventually extracted Holbrook's crew, understood the tactical significance. When we arrived on scene, we could hear that 45 still firing, and we knew the crew was still alive and fighting. That distinctive sound of a 45 gave us immediate situational awareness and helped us plan our approach. The ammunition management challenges faced by helicopter crews in emergency situations were severe. Unlike ground forces, who could carry substantial quantities of ammunition, aircrew members were limited to the rounds in their pistols and perhaps 1 or 2 spare magazines due to weight and space constraints in aircraft. Holbrook's careful ammunition conservation during his 30-minute engagement became a textbook example of pistol employment under extreme constraints. He fired a total of 14 rounds, 7 from his original magazine and 7 from his spare, and achieved what he estimated were 10 to 15 hits on enemy personnel. Every shot had to count, Holbrook explained. I couldn't afford to waste ammunition on suppressive fire or hasty shots. Each round was aimed carefully at the most threatening target, and I only fired when I was confident of making a hit. The terminal ballistics of 45 ACP ammunition at extended ranges were a crucial factor in Holbrook's success. While the large, slow-moving bullet lost velocity and energy at longer ranges, it retained sufficient stopping power to incapacitate targets effectively when properly placed. The weapon maintenance challenges associated with helicopter operations were significant but manageable. The dust, moisture, and temperature variations encountered in flight operations could affect weapon reliability, but the robust design of the M1911A1 proved well suited to the aviation environment. Chief Warrant Officer Michael Dias, who flew UH-1C gunships throughout 3 tours in Vietnam from 1966 to 1970, described the maintenance requirements. The 45 was about the most reliable piece of equipment on the helicopter. While we were constantly dealing with problems with the aircraft systems, that pistol just kept working no matter what we threw at it. The specialized requirements of helicopter aircrew led to various modifications and customizations of standard M1911A1 pistols. These modifications focused primarily on improved retention systems that prevented accidental loss during flight operations and enhanced sights that improved accuracy under the unique lighting conditions encountered in aviation. Some helicopter units developed specialized holsters and retention devices that allowed aircrew to draw and employ their pistols while still connected to aircraft intercom and survival systems. These innovations were typically developed at the unit level using available materials and local manufacturing capabilities. The psychological comfort provided by carrying a reliable sidearm was particularly important for helicopter crews, who faced unique psychological stresses associated with their high-visibility mission profiles and vulnerability to ground fire. The knowledge that each crew member carried 7 rounds of proven stopping power provided reassurance during missions over hostile territory. Major Robert Maxwell, who commanded helicopter operations for the 1st Cavalry Division, Airmobile, understood this psychological dimension. Flying helicopters in Vietnam was dangerous enough without worrying about what would happen if you got shot down. Knowing that every crew member had a reliable weapon for ground combat made everyone more confident and effective in the air. The rescue and recovery operations that defined much of helicopter employment in Vietnam created unique tactical situations where pistols often proved more useful than rifles. The confined spaces inside helicopters and the need for precise fire to avoid damaging aircraft or injuring friendly personnel made pistols the preferred weapons for many aircrew members. Specialist Larry Douglas, who served as a crew chief on medical evacuation helicopters, employed his M1911A1 during multiple landing zone security operations. When you're picking up wounded soldiers from a hot LZ, you need a weapon that you can use effectively in tight spaces without risking the patients or the aircraft, he explained. The .45 was perfect for that role. The coordination between helicopter operations and ground forces often required aircrew to provide direct fire support using personal weapons. While this was not a primary mission for most helicopters, the tactical flexibility provided by armed aircrew proved valuable in numerous situations where conventional fire support was not available. The technical challenges of communicating and coordinating while employing personal weapons from helicopter platforms required innovative solutions. Aircrew had to balance their responsibilities for aircraft operation, radio communication, and fire mission support while engaging targets with pistols, a task that demanded high levels of training and proficiency. Flight surgeon Captain James Aguirre, who flew medical evacuation missions throughout the conflict, developed procedures for medical personnel to provide fire support using pistols while continuing to treat wounded patients. His innovations were adopted by other medical units and contributed to improved survival rates for both aircrew and patients. The key was organization and preparation, Aguirre explained. We practiced pistol employment from helicopter platforms until it became second nature. When you're taking fire during a medical evacuation, you don't have time to figure out how to use your weapon effectively. The intelligence value of aircrew combat reports was enhanced by their ability to provide precise target descriptions and damage assessments. The unique vantage point of helicopter operations, combined with the terminal ballistics effects of pistol fire, enabled aircrew to provide detailed battle damage assessments that were not available from other sources. These intelligence reports contributed to understanding of enemy tactics, equipment, and capabilities throughout the conflict. The detailed observations possible from helicopter platforms, combined with the immediate feedback from pistol engagement results, provided valuable tactical intelligence that influenced future operations. The logistical support for helicopter operations required specialized procedures for pistol ammunition supply and weapon maintenance. The high operational tempo and diverse mission requirements of helicopter units created unique demands that challenged standard supply systems. The ammunition consumption rates for helicopter units varied significantly depending on mission profiles and threat levels. Units operating in contested areas or conducting frequent rescue operations required much higher ammunition allocations than those performing administrative missions in secure areas. Chief Warrant Officer Robert Crowder, who served as a maintenance officer for helicopter operations, developed specialized procedures for tracking ammunition consumption and predicting future requirements. His methods were adopted by other units and contributed to improved logistics support for helicopter operations throughout Vietnam. The challenge was balancing weight and space constraints with the need to ensure that every aircrew member had adequate ammunition for emergency situations, Crowder explained. We couldn't afford to overload the aircraft, but we also couldn't afford to send crews into combat zones without sufficient firepower for survival situations. The training requirements for helicopter aircrew pistol employment were more complex than those for ground forces due to the unique tactical situations encountered in aviation operations. Training programs had to address not only basic marksmanship and weapon handling, but also the specific challenges of employment from aircraft platforms. The specialized nature of helicopter operations also created unique opportunities for cross-training and mutual support between aircrew and ground forces. Many helicopter pilots and crew members received additional training in ground combat techniques, while ground forces learned to coordinate effectively with helicopter operations. This cross-training proved valuable in numerous situations where the normal distinctions between aircrew and ground forces broke down due to tactical necessity. The shared understanding of capabilities and limitations enhanced overall effectiveness and contributed to the legendary cooperation between helicopter and ground units throughout the Vietnam conflict. As helicopter operations expanded throughout the conflict, The role of pistols in aviation missions evolved from emergency backup weapons to essential tools for survival and mission accomplishment. The combination of reliable weapons, skilled operators, and innovative tactics created capabilities that exceeded the original design parameters of both the aircraft and the weapons. The steel that rode in helicopter cockpits and crew compartments throughout Vietnam proved that versatility and reliability were more important than raw firepower in determining weapon effectiveness. When aircrew like Holbrook found themselves fighting for survival on the ground, their .45 caliber companions provided exactly the capabilities needed to survive until rescue arrived. The brown water of the Mekong Delta presented unique challenges for American forces that were unlike anything encountered in previous conflicts. In this maze of rivers, canals, and swampland that covered 40,000 square kilometers of South Vietnam, the traditional distinctions between land and naval warfare dissolved into a new form of combat that required innovative tactics and specialized equipment. For the sailors and soldiers of the mobile riverine force, the M1911A1 pistol became an essential tool for survival in an environment where engagement ranges were measured in meters and the enemy could appear from any direction without warning. Lieutenant Commander James Patterson understood these challenges when he assumed command of River Division 513 in March of 1967. His force of 15 swift boats and supporting craft was tasked with interdicting enemy supply routes and providing fire support for ground operations throughout the vast Delta region. The Delta was different from anything we trained for, Patterson explained. You had narrow waterways where you could be ambushed from both banks simultaneously, and often the only weapons you could bring to bear effectively were personal weapons like pistols and rifles. The tactical environment of riverine operations created unique requirements for small arms employment. The confined spaces aboard patrol boats, the need for rapid target engagement from unstable platforms, and the requirement to avoid damage to critical boat systems made pistols valuable weapons for river sailors. The technical challenges of employing pistols from small boat platforms were substantial. The motion of boats in river currents, the noise of engines and water, and the limited fields of fire available from defensive positions required specialized techniques that were developed through combat experience rather than formal training. Petty Officer First Class Michael Thompson, who served as a gunner's mate aboard PCF, Patrol Craft Fast 94, developed innovative techniques for pistol employment that were adopted throughout the riverine force. His methods emphasized rapid target acquisition, precise shot placement, and coordinated fire with other boat crew members. The key to effective pistol shooting from a moving boat was understanding the rhythm of the water and the boat's motion, Thompson explained. You had to time your shots for the moment when the boat was most stable, and you had to lead your targets to account for both your motion and theirs. The ammunition considerations for riverine operations were influenced by the unique tactical environment of the Delta. The high humidity and frequent exposure to water required special attention to ammunition storage and handling, while the potential for extended engagements necessitated larger ammunition loads than were typical for other naval operations. The stopping power of .45 ACP ammunition proved particularly valuable in riverine combat, where enemy forces often wore heavy clothing or equipment that could reduce the effectiveness of smaller calibers. The large, slow-moving bullet penetrated vegetation and light cover effectively while delivering sufficient energy to incapacitate targets reliably. Chief Petty Officer Robert Wilson, who commanded a river patrol boat during the Tet Offensive of 1968, described the effectiveness of pistol fire during a canal ambush near Kinloch. We took fire from both banks simultaneously, and the boat's machine guns couldn't traverse fast enough to engage targets on both sides. That's when pistols became our primary weapons. Wilson's engagement lasted over 20 minutes and demonstrated the value of having multiple crew members armed with effective sidearms. The combined firepower of 4 pistols enabled the patrol boat to suppress enemy positions on both banks while maneuvering to a more favorable tactical position. The .45 rounds were punching through the vegetation and hitting enemy soldiers who thought they were protected by cover, Wilson recalled. The psychological effect was as important as the physical damage. The enemy stopped shooting and started moving, which gave us the opportunity to break contact and call for support. The psychological aspects of pistol employment in riverine operations were particularly important due to the isolated nature of many missions. River patrol boats often operated alone or in small groups far from supporting forces, making crew confidence and morale critical factors in mission success. The distinctive sound of M1911A1 pistols firing provided immediate identification for friendly forces and created a psychological impact on enemy forces who had learned to respect American firepower. The weapon's reputation for reliability and stopping power enhanced crew confidence during dangerous missions in contested waters. Lieutenant Colonel Harold Fritz, who commanded riverine operations for the 9th Infantry Division, understood the importance of crew confidence. When you're operating in small boats in enemy territory, every crew member has to believe in their ability to fight effectively. The 45 gave our sailors that confidence because they knew it would work when they needed it most. The maintenance challenges associated with riverine operations were severe due to constant exposure to water, humidity, and marine environments that could corrode weapons rapidly. The robust construction of the M1911A1 proved well suited to these conditions, but specialized maintenance procedures were required to maintain peak performance. Ship's armor gunners mate First Class Anthony Rodriguez developed maintenance protocols specifically for riverine environments that were adopted throughout the mobile riverine force. His procedures included daily inspection and cleaning, specialized lubricants for marine environments, and replacement schedules that prevented failures due to corrosion or wear. The Delta environment was harder on weapons than anything we'd encountered before, Rodriguez explained, but the 1911 was built tough enough to handle it. With proper maintenance, these pistols would function reliably despite constant exposure to water and humidity. The specialized requirements of riverine operations led to various modifications and improvements to standard M1911A1 pistols. These modifications focused on enhanced corrosion resistance, improved sights for low light conditions, and retention systems that prevented accidental loss during boat operations. Some riverine units developed specialized ammunition loads that were optimized for marine environments and the specific target sets encountered in Delta operations. These loads typically emphasized reliability and consistency over maximum ballistic performance, reflecting the unique requirements of riverine combat. The coordination between riverine forces and ground units created unique tactical situations where pistols proved valuable for close-range fire support and target designation. The mobility of river patrol boats enabled them to provide fire support in areas where conventional artillery or air support was not available. Seaman First Class David Chun, who served as a radioman aboard a river patrol boat, used his M1911A1 to provide covering fire for ground troops during a joint operation near the Plain of Reeds in September of 1968. The Army guys were pinned down by sniper fire, and we could get close enough to engage the enemy positions with pistols while the soldiers moved to better cover, he recalled. Chen's experience demonstrated the tactical flexibility that pistols provided in riverine operations. The weapon's compact size and ease of handling made it ideal for employment from the cramped quarters of patrol boats, while its stopping power was sufficient to neutralize threats at the close ranges typical of Delta combat. The intelligence value of riverine operations was enhanced by the ability of boat crews to provide detailed observations of enemy activity and terrain features. The unique mobility of river patrol boats, combined with the precise engagement capabilities provided by pistol-armed crews, enabled collection of intelligence that was not available through other means. These intelligence reports contributed to understanding of enemy logistics networks, base areas, and movement patterns throughout the Delta region. The detailed observations possible from river patrol operations, combined with immediate feedback from combat engagements, provided valuable tactical intelligence that influenced future operations. The logistical support for riverine operations required specialized procedures for ammunition supply and weapon maintenance in remote Delta locations. The challenging transportation environment and limited storage facilities created unique demands that tested military supply systems. The ammunition consumption rates for riverine units were generally higher than those for conventional naval operations due to the frequent combat engagements and specialized training requirements. Units operating in the most contested areas of the Delta required substantial ammunition allocations to maintain operational effectiveness. Logistics Officer Lieutenant William Turner developed innovative supply procedures that utilized both military and civilian transportation assets to maintain adequate ammunition supplies for riverine operations. His methods were adopted by other units and contributed to improved logistics support throughout the mobile riverine force. The challenge was getting ammunition and supplies to isolated boat bases scattered throughout the Delta, Turner explained. We had to use everything from helicopters to civilian sampans to maintain our supply lines, and we couldn't afford to run short when our boats were engaged in combat operations. The training requirements for riverine pistol employment were more complex than those for conventional naval operations due to the unique tactical situations encountered in Delta warfare. Training programs had to address not only basic marksmanship and weapon handling, but also the specific challenges of employment from small boat platforms. The specialized nature of riverine operations also created unique opportunities for cross-training and mutual support between naval and ground forces. Many riverine sailors received additional training in ground combat techniques, while ground forces learned to coordinate effectively with riverine operations. This cross-training proved valuable in numerous joint operations where the normal distinctions between naval and ground forces became blurred due to tactical necessity. The shared understanding of capabilities and limitations enhanced overall effectiveness and contributed to successful coordination between riverine and ground units throughout the conflict. The medical support for riverine operations was complicated by the remote locations and limited evacuation capabilities available in many Delta areas. The stopping power of 45 ACP ammunition was particularly important in this environment because it increased the likelihood of immediately incapacitating threats, reducing the risk to wounded personnel during evacuation procedures. Navy Hospital Corpsman Second Class James Mendez, who provided medical support for riverine operations, observed the terminal effects of pistol wounds during numerous combat engagements. The guys hit by 45 rounds were usually out of the fight immediately. That was important in our environment because we often couldn't get wounded personnel to medical facilities quickly. The effectiveness of riverine pistol employment was demonstrated during numerous major operations throughout the conflict, including the coordinated assaults on enemy base areas during the Tet Offensive and the interdiction campaigns that disrupted enemy supply routes throughout the Delta. These operations established the value of pistol-armed river patrol boats as force multipliers that could provide fire support and tactical mobility in environments where conventional forces were less effective. The combination of water mobility, precise firepower, and tactical flexibility made riverine forces valuable assets for commanders throughout South Vietnam. As American involvement in Vietnam drew to a close, the lessons learned from riverine operations influenced naval doctrine and equipment development for decades. The successful employment of pistol-armed patrol boats in the Mekong Delta demonstrated that small units with appropriate weapons could achieve tactical success in challenging environments. The steel that rode the brown waters of the Mekong Delta proved that adaptability and innovation were as important as firepower in determining tactical success. When riverine sailors found themselves fighting in an environment that combined the challenges of land and naval warfare, their .45 caliber sidearms provided exactly the capabilities needed to accomplish missions that seemed impossible with conventional weapons and tactics. In the shadows of the Vietnam conflict, where deniability was as important as lethality and mission success was measured in intelligence gathered rather than enemy casualties, the M1911A1 pistol found a new role in the hands of America's most elite warriors. The Studies and Observations Group, SOG, the Central Intelligence Agency's Special Activities Division, and other classified units operating beyond the conventional boundaries of warfare brought different requirements to sidearm selection and employment. For these operators, the pistol was not a backup weapon but a primary tool for missions where stealth, precision, and the ability to operate captured enemy weapons were essential for survival and success. The aging .45 caliber sidearm proved surprisingly well suited to this role, despite having been designed decades before special operations became a recognized military discipline. Major Richard Meadows, who commanded special operations teams throughout Vietnam from 1965 to 1969, understood the unique requirements of unconventional warfare. In our business, you couldn't rely on fire support or reinforcements. When things went bad, you had what you carried, and that .45 had to work perfectly every single time. The technical requirements for special operations sidearms were different from those for conventional forces. Reliability was paramount, but so were factors like sound signature, muzzle flash, and the ability to use captured ammunition. The M1911A1 met most of these requirements naturally, while specialized modifications could address specific mission needs. The sound signature of the .45 ACP cartridge was actually advantageous for some special operations missions. The subsonic velocity of the standard military load made it inherently quieter than higher velocity cartridges, and the large case capacity provided excellent performance with suppressors when stealth was required. Captain William Colby, who later became Director of Central Intelligence but served as a field operative in Vietnam during the early years of American involvement, described the pistol's role in covert operations. The .45 was perfect for our work because it was powerful enough to be decisive, quiet enough to be discreet, and common enough that finding ammunition wasn't a problem even in remote areas. The specialized ammunition requirements for covert operations led to the development of various non-standard loads that were optimized for specific mission profiles. These included subsonic loads for suppressed weapons, frangible bullets for use in sensitive environments, and specialized penetrator rounds for defeating light armor or barriers. Most of these specialized rounds were developed outside normal military procurement channels and were supplied directly to special operations units through classified logistics networks. The development and testing of these rounds was conducted in complete secrecy, with results reported only to the specific units that would employ them operationally. The CIA's Technical Services Division developed several variants of suppressed M1911A1 pistols for use by intelligence operatives and special operations personnel. These weapons featured integral suppressors, specialized ammunition, and modifications that reduced mechanical noise during operation. The effectiveness of these suppressed weapons was demonstrated during numerous classified operations throughout the conflict, though specific details remain classified decades after the war ended. However, general descriptions provided by former operatives indicate that the suppressed .45 was highly effective for the precision elimination of specific targets. Special Forces Captain Larry Thorne, a legendary soldier who had previously fought against Soviet forces in Finland during World War II, brought unique perspectives to pistol employment in unconventional warfare. His experience with covert operations in multiple conflicts influenced American special operations doctrine throughout Vietnam. "The pistol was your last resort and your first choice," Thorne explained. "When you needed to eliminate a sentry quietly, or when you found yourself in close-quarters combat where a rifle was useless, that .45 could solve problems that no other weapon could handle as effectively." Thorne's influence on American special operations extended beyond tactical techniques to include equipment modifications and specialized training programs. His innovations in pistol employment were adopted by special operations units throughout Southeast Asia and influenced American unconventional warfare doctrine for decades. The psychological warfare aspects of pistol employment in special operations were carefully considered and deliberately exploited. The use of suppressed weapons, specialized ammunition, and precision shooting techniques created psychological effects that were often more important than the direct physical damage inflicted. The ability of special operations personnel to eliminate specific targets with surgical precision using pistols had significant psychological impact on enemy leadership and security forces. The knowledge that American operatives could strike precisely and disappear without detection created an atmosphere of uncertainty and paranoia that hampered enemy operations. Lieutenant Colonel William Yarborough, who commanded special operations throughout Southeast Asia, understood these psychological dimensions. The strategic value of special operations wasn't measured in body counts or territory captured. It was measured in the enemy's reaction to our capabilities and their allocation of resources to defend against threats they couldn't predict or prevent. The intelligence gathering capabilities of special operations personnel were enhanced by their ability to employ captured weapons effectively. The M1911A1's simple design and robust construction made it easy to maintain and operate even under adverse conditions, while its commonality with weapons used by Allied forces simplified logistics and reduced the risk of compromise. The ability to use captured enemy ammunition was particularly valuable for deep reconnaissance missions where resupply was impossible. While the .45 ACP cartridge was not commonly used by enemy forces, the pistol's reliability with various types of ammunition enabled operators to use whatever rounds were available when necessary. Chief Warrant Officer Jerry Prater, who served with SOG throughout multiple tours in Vietnam, described the importance of weapon flexibility. On long-range missions behind enemy lines, you couldn't count on being resupplied with standard ammunition. The ability to use whatever rounds you could find, whether they were captured enemy supplies or locally manufactured substitutes, could make the difference between mission success and failure. The medical support for special operations was complicated by the remote locations and classified nature of many missions. The stopping power of 45 ACP ammunition was particularly important because it increased the likelihood of immediately incapacitating threats, reducing the risk of compromise during medical evacuation procedures. Navy Hospital Corpsman First Class Don Ferguson, who provided medical support for special operations teams, observed the terminal effects of pistol fire during classified engagements. The guys knew that if they had to shoot, they needed to end the threat immediately. The 45 gave them the stopping power to do that with a single well-placed shot, which was essential when compromise could mean death for the entire team. The training requirements for special operations pistol employment were more demanding than those for conventional forces due to the precision and reliability required for covert missions. Training programs included not only advanced marksmanship techniques but also specialized skills like shooting from unconventional positions, engaging targets in low light conditions, and coordinating fire with team members. The specialized nature of these training programs was reflected in the selection criteria for personnel assigned to special operations units. Only soldiers with demonstrated aptitude for precision shooting and the mental discipline required for covert operations were considered for these assignments. Master Sergeant Ralph Reisdorf, who served as an instructor at the Special Warfare School during the Vietnam era, developed training programs that became standard for special operations forces throughout the military. We weren't just teaching marksmanship, we were teaching judgment, precision, and the ability to make life or death decisions under extreme stress. The pistol was just one tool, but it had to be employed with absolute precision. The equipment modifications made to M1911A1 pistols for special operations use were more extensive than those for conventional forces. These modifications included improved sights, specialized grips, custom trigger work, and various accessories designed to enhance performance in specific tactical situations. Many of these modifications were performed by specialized technicians working directly for intelligence agencies or special operations commands. The quality and sophistication of these modifications often exceeded what was available through normal military channels and reflected the critical importance of weapon reliability for covert operations. The ammunition logistics for special operations units required specialized procedures and security measures that were not necessary for conventional forces. The classified nature of many operations, combined with the specialized ammunition requirements, created unique challenges for supply personnel. Captain Lewis Horner, who served as a logistics officer for special operations, developed procedures for secure ammunition supply that were adopted throughout the special operations community. Everything about our operations was classified, including the ammunition we used. We had to develop supply chains that could provide what our operators needed without compromising operational security. The psychological profiling of personnel selected for special operations included assessments of their ability to employ weapons effectively under extreme stress. The reliability of the M1911A1 was considered a positive factor because it reduced one source of stress and uncertainty for operators who were already operating under enormous psychological pressure. Dr. Patricia Williams, a military psychiatrist who evaluated special operations personnel, identified weapon confidence as a crucial factor in operational effectiveness. The soldiers consistently mentioned their confidence in their weapons as a source of psychological strength. When they knew their pistol would fire every time they pulled the trigger, it reduced their overall stress level and enhanced their ability to focus on mission objectives. The coordination between special operations units and conventional forces often required careful planning to avoid fratricide incidents involving operators carrying non-standard weapons or employing unusual tactics. The distinctive sound of the M1911A1 provided one method for identifying friendly forces, but specialized coordination procedures were still necessary. The intelligence value of special operations missions was often enhanced by the precise nature of pistol employment, which enabled operators to capture enemy personnel and equipment intact rather than destroying them with larger weapons. This capability provided valuable intelligence that was not available through conventional military operations. The strategic impact of special operations employing pistols effectively was difficult to measure quantitatively, but qualitative assessments suggested that these missions had effects far beyond their scale or cost. The ability to strike precisely at high-value targets created strategic effects that influenced enemy decision-making at the highest levels. As the Vietnam conflict progressed and special operations expanded in scope and scale, the lessons learned about pistol employment in covert operations influenced equipment development and training programs that continued long after the war ended. The successful use of the M1911A1 in special operations validated its design principles and demonstrated the continuing relevance of precision weapons in modern warfare. The steel that operated in the shadows of Vietnam proved that some missions required not just firepower, but precision, reliability, and the confidence that comes from carrying a weapon that has been proven under the most demanding conditions imaginable. When special operations personnel found themselves behind enemy lines with only their skills and their sidearms to rely upon, the 60-year-old pistol design provided exactly the capabilities needed to accomplish missions that could influence the course of the entire conflict. The pre-dawn darkness of January 30th, 1968, shattered with the sound of automatic weapons fire, rocket-propelled grenades, and the distinctive reports of M1911A1 pistols as North Vietnamese and Viet Cong forces launched coordinated attacks on over 100 cities and towns throughout South Vietnam. The Tet Offensive would mark the beginning of the end for American involvement in Vietnam, but it would also provide the final, decisive test for a pistol design that had served American forces through 4 major conflicts. In Saigon, Marine Security Guard Staff Sergeant Robert Frazier found himself defending the American Embassy compound with nothing but his M1911A1 and 6 spare magazines against Viet Cong sappers who had breached the outer perimeter. The engagement would last over 6 hours and demonstrate once again that when everything else failed, American soldiers could still depend on John Moses Browning's masterpiece to function exactly as designed. When the shooting started, I wasn't thinking about embassy protocol or diplomatic immunity, Frazier recalled decades later. I was thinking about keeping those sappers from getting inside the Chancery building, and my .45 was the only thing standing between them and the ambassador. The Battle of the American Embassy became one of the most televised and psychologically significant engagements of the entire Vietnam conflict. While the actual military threat to the embassy compound was relatively limited, 19 Viet Cong sappers armed with AK-47 rifles and rocket-propelled grenades, the symbolic value of the attack was enormous. Frazier's defense of the embassy demonstrated the continuing relevance of individual marksmanship and reliable weapons in an era of high-technology warfare. His precise shooting with the M1911A1, combined with coordinated fire from other Marine Guards, prevented the attackers from reaching their primary objectives despite achieving complete tactical surprise. The .45 gave me the confidence to engage targets at ranges where I knew I could be effective, Frazier explained. In that courtyard, with limited cover and multiple threats, I needed a weapon that would stop an attacker with one shot. The 230-grain bullet delivered exactly that kind of stopping power. The technical performance of Frazier's pistol during the extended engagement provided additional validation of the weapon's reliability under extreme stress. Despite firing over 50 rounds during the 6-hour battle, the 60-year-old weapon functioned flawlessly and enabled Frazier to maintain effective resistance until reinforcements arrived. The psychological impact of the embassy attack extended far beyond its immediate military consequences. The sight of Viet Cong forces inside the American embassy compound, broadcast live on American television, fundamentally altered public perception of the war and contributed to growing opposition to continued American involvement. However, from a purely military perspective, the embassy attack demonstrated the effectiveness of well-trained American forces armed with reliable weapons. The Marine Security Guards, despite being outnumbered and surprised, successfully defended their positions and prevented the enemy from achieving their tactical objectives. Major General Keith Ware, who commanded American forces in the Saigon area during the Tet Offensive, understood the broader significance. What happened at the embassy wasn't just a tactical victory, it was proof that American soldiers with proper training and reliable weapons could hold their own against any enemy, regardless of the circumstances. The urban warfare environment of the Tet Offensive created unique challenges for pistol employment that differed significantly from the jungle and rural combat that had characterized earlier phases of the Vietnam conflict. The close quarters, civilian populations, and complex terrain of cities like Saigon, Hue, and Da Nang required precision and restraint that were well suited to pistol capabilities. Captain Thomas Baker of the 1st Cavalry Division, Airmobile, experienced these challenges during house-to-house fighting in Saigon's Cholon district. His unit was tasked with clearing Viet Cong forces from civilian buildings while minimizing collateral damage and avoiding civilian casualties. In that environment, rifles were often too powerful and created too much risk of overpenetration, Baker explained. The .45 gave us the stopping power we needed to neutralize threats, while reducing the risk of injuring civilians in adjacent rooms or buildings. Baker's experience highlighted the importance of weapon selection in urban combat environments. The .45 ACP cartridge's relatively low velocity and large diameter made it less likely to overpenetrate walls and partitions compared to rifle cartridges, reducing the risk of unintended casualties. The ammunition considerations for urban combat during Tet were complicated by the extended nature of many engagements and the difficulty of resupply in contested areas. Soldiers who had previously carried minimal pistol ammunition found themselves engaged in prolonged firefights where every round was precious. Sergeant First Class William O'Brien, who fought in the Battle for Hue from February 5 to March 2, 1968, described the ammunition challenge. We were in those buildings for weeks and regular resupply wasn't always possible. Having a pistol that worked reliably with whatever ammunition we could find became a matter of survival. The Battle of Hue became the longest and most intense urban combat engagement of the Vietnam War, lasting 26 days and involving house-to-house fighting through the ancient imperial capital. The M1911A1 proved particularly valuable in this environment due to its effectiveness at close range and its reliability under the harsh conditions of urban warfare. The psychological aspects of fighting in populated areas added another dimension to pistol employment during Tet. The knowledge that civilian lives were at stake required soldiers to exercise greater precision and restraint than was necessary in unpopulated combat zones. Marine Captain Willibald Bianchi, who commanded infantry companies during the Hue fighting, understood these psychological pressures. Every shot had to be precisely aimed and justified. The .45 forced you to get close and be accurate, which actually made you more conscious of your targets and more careful about when you engaged. The medical challenges of urban combat were complicated by the presence of civilian casualties and the difficulty of evacuating wounded personnel through contested streets and buildings. The stopping power of .45 ACP ammunition was particularly important in this environment because it reduced the likelihood of wounded enemies continuing to pose threats to medical personnel. Navy Hospital Corpsman Robert Maxwell, who treated casualties during the Hue fighting, observed the terminal effects of pistol fire in urban combat. The guys hit by .45 rounds were usually incapacitated immediately, which was important when you're trying to treat wounded soldiers in a building where there might still be enemy fighters in the next room. The intelligence value of urban combat during Tet was enhanced by the opportunity to capture enemy personnel and equipment intact. The precision capabilities of pistol-armed soldiers enabled the capture of valuable prisoners and documents that provided crucial intelligence about enemy organization and capabilities. The logistics of supporting urban combat operations required innovative solutions to the challenges of ammunition supply and weapon maintenance in contested city environments. Standard supply procedures were inadequate for the extended engagements and complex terrain encountered during Tet. Chief Warrant Officer Harold Warner developed specialized logistics procedures for urban combat that were adopted throughout American forces engaged in city fighting. His innovations included pre-positioned ammunition caches, mobile maintenance teams, and coordination procedures that ensured weapons remained functional despite the harsh conditions. Urban combat was harder on weapons and equipment than anything we'd encountered before, Warner explained. The dust, debris, and constant handling created maintenance challenges that required new approaches and innovative solutions. The training lessons learned during urban combat were incorporated into American military doctrine and influenced equipment development for decades after the Vietnam conflict ended. The successful employment of pistols in city fighting demonstrated the continuing relevance of close-quarters combat skills in modern warfare. The strategic consequences of the Tet Offensive extended far beyond its immediate tactical results. While American and South Vietnamese forces successfully repelled the communist attacks and inflicted heavy casualties on enemy forces, the political and psychological impact of the offensive fundamentally altered American public perception of the war. The role of pistol-armed soldiers in defending key installations and maintaining resistance during the most intense fighting demonstrated the continuing importance of individual combat skills and reliable weapons in determining tactical outcomes. Despite the technological sophistication of modern warfare, victory still often came down to individual soldiers with personal weapons engaging enemy forces at close range. Colonel Robert Cole, who commanded infantry forces during several major engagements of the Tet Offensive, summarized the lessons learned. All the technology and firepower in the world doesn't replace the need for well-trained soldiers with reliable weapons. The 45 proved once again that some things never become obsolete. As 1968 progressed and American casualties mounted, the political pressure to end American involvement in Vietnam intensified. The M1911A1, which had begun the conflict as the standard sidearm of American forces, would soon be scheduled for replacement by more modern designs that reflected changing military priorities. The technical evaluation of pistol performance during Tet provided valuable data for future weapon development programs. The reliability, stopping power, and precision capabilities demonstrated by the M1911A1 established performance standards that influenced the selection criteria for its eventual replacement. However, the replacement process would prove to be lengthy and controversial, with the M1911A1 continuing to serve alongside newer weapons for decades after the Vietnam conflict ended. The combat-proven reliability and effectiveness demonstrated during Tet provided strong arguments for retaining the aging design despite pressure to modernize. The psychological attachment of American soldiers to their pistols was demonstrated repeatedly during the final years of the Vietnam conflict. Surveys conducted during the withdrawal period showed that soldiers consistently rated the M1911A1 as one of the most reliable and effective weapons in the American inventory. This soldier confidence was based on combat experience rather than abstract technical specifications. The soldiers who had carried these pistols through the tunnels of Siu Chi, the streets of Saigon, and the rivers of the Mekong Delta understood their capabilities and limitations better than any laboratory test could reveal. As American forces began their phased withdrawal from Vietnam in 1969, the lessons learned about pistol employment during the conflict influenced military doctrine and training programs that would guide American forces for decades. The successful use of 60-year-old weapons in modern combat demonstrated that some design principles transcend technological eras. The final chapter of the M1911A1's service in Vietnam would be written not in dramatic battles, but in the countless small engagements and routine operations that characterized the later years of American involvement. These everyday uses of the pistol, while less dramatic than the major battles, provided equally important validation of the weapon's design and capabilities. The statistical story of the M1911A1 in Vietnam reveals the true scope of America's most enduring military sidearms' final combat deployment. By 1969, at the peak of American involvement, over 543,000 U.S. military personnel were serving in Southeast Asia, and virtually every one of them had access to the 70-year-old pistol design that had become as much a part of American military identity as the flag itself. The production numbers behind this massive deployment tell a story of American industrial capacity and military logistics that spanned 4 decades and 2 world wars. From 1911 to 1945, American manufacturers had produced approximately 2.7 million M1911 and M1911A1 pistols for military use. By the time of the Vietnam conflict, nearly every one of these weapons was either in the active inventory or had been through multiple rebuild cycles at military arsenals. Master Sergeant James Wilson, who supervised pistol maintenance for the 25th Infantry Division throughout his 3 tours in Vietnam, understood these numbers in human terms. Every single 45 in Vietnam had history. These weren't new weapons fresh from the factory, they were veterans that had been rebuilt, refurbished, and passed down through generations of American soldiers. The rebuild statistics were staggering in their scope and complexity. From the mid-1920s to the mid-1950s, literally thousands of M1911 and M1911A1 pistols had been systematically refurbished at U.S. arsenals including Rock Island Armory, Springfield Armory, and Augusta Arsenal. Each rebuild involved complete disassembly, inspection of all components, replacement of worn parts, and reassembly to original specifications. The markings on Vietnam-era pistols told the story of this refurbishment process. Weapons marked RIA had been rebuilt at Rock Island Armory, while SA indicated Springfield Armory work, and S showed Augusta Arsenal refurbishment. These arsenal marks became a form of military genealogy that connected individual weapons to specific periods and locations in American military history. The technical specifications that mattered most to soldiers in Vietnam were reliability, stopping power, and maintainability under harsh tropical conditions. The M1911A1 delivered all three with specifications that remained essentially unchanged from Browning's original design. 8.5 inches overall length, 5.03-inch barrel, 3 pounds loaded weight, and 7-round magazine capacity. The ballistic performance that made the difference in combat situations was measured in foot-pounds of energy and bullet diameter rather than velocity or trajectory. The standard military .45 ACP cartridge delivered approximately 400 foot-pounds of muzzle energy with a bullet diameter of 451 thousandths of an inch, specifications that translated into devastating terminal ballistics at close range. Lieutenant Colonel Gary Gordon, who commanded artillery units that provided fire support throughout Vietnam, understood the statistical significance of these numbers. When you're talking about stopping power at ranges under 25 meters, the .45 was simply in a different category from anything else we carried. The physics of that big, slow bullet created wound channels that ended fights immediately. The ammunition consumption statistics for Vietnam revealed the intensity of close-quarters combat throughout the conflict. While rifle and machine gun ammunition consumption received most attention from logistics planners, pistol ammunition expenditure often exceeded pre-war estimates by factors of 3 or 4 in units engaged in tunnel clearing, urban combat, or riverine operations. The production capacity required to support this ammunition consumption was substantial. Lake City Army Ammunition Plant, the primary source for military pistol ammunition, operated at capacity throughout the Vietnam era to meet the demands of combat operations plus training requirements for the expanding American military. The human statistics behind M1911A1 employment in Vietnam are more difficult to quantify but equally significant. Conservative estimates suggest that over 200,000 American servicemen carried the pistol as their primary or secondary weapon during the conflict, making it one of the most widely distributed weapon systems in American military history. Chief Warrant Officer Randall Sugart, who served multiple tours as a helicopter crew chief, represented thousands of soldiers whose survival depended on their pistols. The statistics that mattered to us weren't production numbers or technical specifications, they were reliability percentages and stoppage rates. We needed to know that our .45 would fire every single time we pulled the trigger. The reliability statistics compiled during Vietnam validated decades of design refinement and field testing. Military tests conducted during the conflict showed stoppage rates for properly maintained M1911A1 pistols of less than 1 malfunction per 1,000 rounds fired, performance that exceeded specifications for many modern weapons. The accuracy statistics achieved by well-trained soldiers with M1911A1 pistols often exceeded the weapon's official specifications. Competitive shooters serving in Vietnam regularly achieved groups of 3 inches or less at 25 meters, demonstrating that the limiting factor was often shooter skill rather than weapon capability. The maintenance statistics compiled during Vietnam operations provided crucial data for future weapon development programs. The average M1911A1 required cleaning every 500 rounds of firing and major maintenance every 5,000 rounds, requirements that were easily met by trained military personnel using standard field equipment. Armor Warrant Officer Robert Sugart, who maintained weapons for special operations units throughout Southeast Asia, kept detailed records of maintenance requirements and failure modes. The data we collected in Vietnam showed that properly maintained .45s would function reliably under conditions that would disable more modern weapons. That information influenced weapon design for decades. The cost statistics associated with M1911A1 operations in Vietnam demonstrated the economic efficiency of using existing weapons rather than developing new designs. The total cost of pistol operations, including ammunition, maintenance, and replacement parts, represented less than 1% of total military expenditures for the conflict. The training statistics compiled during Vietnam revealed significant variations in pistol proficiency between different military specialties and units. Tunnel rats and special operations personnel typically achieved qualification scores 20 to 30% higher than conventional infantry soldiers, reflecting the importance of specialized training in determining weapon effectiveness. The casualty statistics associated with pistol employment in Vietnam were classified at the time but have since been partially released through Freedom of Information Act requests. While specific numbers remain classified, available data suggests that American soldiers armed with M1911A1 pistols achieved favorable casualty exchange ratios in close-quarters combat situations. The geographic statistics of pistol employment revealed interesting patterns about the nature of combat in different areas of South Vietnam. Urban areas like Saigon and Hue showed higher rates of pistol usage, while rural areas with longer engagement ranges relied more heavily on rifles and crew-served weapons. The seasonal statistics of pistol maintenance showed significant variations related to monsoon cycles and humidity levels. Weapons required more frequent cleaning and lubrication during the wet season, while dry season operations created different challenges related to dust and debris infiltration. The unit statistics compiled during Vietnam showed that elite units consistently achieved higher levels of pistol proficiency and lower malfunction rates than conventional forces. This difference was attributed to better training, higher maintenance standards, and more experienced personnel rather than superior equipment. The time in service statistics for M1911A1 pistols used in Vietnam were remarkable for their longevity. Many weapons had been in continuous military service for over 50 years, having been originally manufactured during or immediately after World War I and continuously rebuilt and maintained through multiple conflicts. Staff Sergeant Robert Davis, who tracked weapon histories for the 1st Cavalry Division, documented pistols that had served in France during World War I, the Pacific during World War II, Korea during the Korean conflict, and Vietnam during the Southeast Asian War. These weren't just weapons, they were time machines that connected us to every American soldier who had carried them before us. The industrial statistics behind pistol support operations in Vietnam demonstrated the complexity of maintaining aging weapons in a modern conflict. Replacement parts were manufactured by dozens of contractors using specifications and tooling that dated back to the 1940s, creating quality control challenges that required innovative solutions. The logistics statistics for pistol operations revealed the global scope of support requirements. Ammunition was manufactured in the United States and shipped to Vietnam, while replacement parts came from contractors scattered across the American industrial base, creating supply chains that spanned thousands of miles and multiple time zones. The enemy statistics related to captured American pistols provided intelligence about the effectiveness and desirability of the M1911A1 design. Communist forces consistently prioritized the capture of American pistols over most other small arms, indicating their recognition of the weapon's superior capabilities. The technical intelligence statistics compiled from captured enemy copies of American pistols revealed sophisticated reverse engineering capabilities and demonstrated the international influence of Browning's design. Vietnamese manufactured copies achieved approximately 80% of the performance of original American weapons using primitive manufacturing techniques. The training statistics compiled during the Vietnam era influenced American military education for decades after the conflict ended. The demonstrated importance of pistol proficiency led to enhanced marksmanship programs and increased emphasis on close-quarters combat skills in military training curricula. The research and development statistics associated with potential M1911A1 replacements showed the difficulty of improving upon a proven design. Multiple replacement programs were initiated during the Vietnam era, but none achieved sufficient improvement in performance to justify the cost and complexity of replacement. The international statistics of pistol usage during Vietnam demonstrated the global influence of American weapon design. Allied forces from Australia, South Korea, Thailand, and other nations operated alongside American units while carrying different sidearms, providing comparative data on pistol effectiveness across multiple weapon systems. The post-war statistics of M1911A1 service showed the lasting impact of Vietnam combat experience on American military planning. The weapon continued in service for nearly 2 decades after the end of the Vietnam conflict, with final replacement not occurring until the mid-1980s. The medical statistics associated with pistol wounds treated during Vietnam provided valuable data for trauma medicine and influenced the development of battlefield medical procedures. The distinctive wound characteristics of 45 ACP bullets enabled medical personnel to develop specialized treatment protocols that improved survival rates. The psychological statistics compiled through surveys of Vietnam veterans revealed consistently high levels of confidence in the M1911A1's reliability and effectiveness. This soldier satisfaction rating exceeded those for most other weapon systems used during the conflict and contributed to the weapon's legendary status among military personnel. As these numbers accumulated over the course of America's longest war, they told the story of a weapon system that had achieved something rare in military history: technical specifications that remained relevant across multiple generations of warfare, manufacturing quality that enabled decades of reliable service, and combat effectiveness that earned the trust and confidence of the soldiers who depended upon it for their lives. The statistics were impressive, but behind every number was a human story of American soldiers whose survival often depended upon 7 rounds of .45 caliber ammunition and a 70-year-old pistol design that refused to become obsolete. The journey from the Western Front of 1918 to the tunnels of Siuchi 50 years later represented more than just geographical distance for the M1911A1 pistol. It marked an evolution in manufacturing techniques, materials science, and tactical employment that transformed Browning's original design from a cavalry officer's sidearm into the primary weapon for some of America's most specialized warriors. The metallurgical analysis of Vietnam-era M1911A1 pistols reveals the story of American industrial advancement across 5 decades of continuous production and refinement. The early pistols manufactured by Colt in 1911 featured carbon steel components with traditional bluing, while Vietnam-era weapons incorporated improved steel alloys, advanced heat treatment processes, and the practical Parkerized finishes that had been perfected during World War II. Dr. William Bruce Thomas, a metallurgist who analyzed captured American weapons for the Aberdeen Proving Ground during the Vietnam conflict, documented these material improvements. The steel used in Vietnam-era .45s was significantly superior to early production weapons in terms of corrosion resistance, fatigue life, and overall durability. Decades of manufacturing experience had resulted in continuous improvements that weren't reflected in the basic specifications. The barrel technology evolution was particularly significant for weapons that had seen continuous service across multiple conflicts. Original M1911 barrels were manufactured using traditional machining techniques with relatively loose tolerances, while Vietnam-era replacement barrels incorporated precision manufacturing methods that improved accuracy and extended service life. The rifling specifications for Vietnam-era barrels reflected accumulated knowledge about bullet stabilization and accuracy requirements. The standard twist rate of 1 turn in 16 inches, 406 millimeters, had been optimized through decades of testing to provide optimal stability for the 230-grain military bullet across the full range of combat temperatures and conditions. The frame manufacturing evolution demonstrated American progress in precision casting and machining techniques. Early M1911 frames required extensive hand fitting and adjustment, while Vietnam-era production achieved interchangeability between components from different manufacturers, a crucial advantage for field maintenance operations. Major General Dallas Owens, who supervised pistol procurement during the Vietnam buildup, understood the significance of these manufacturing improvements. The interchangeability we achieved by the 1960s meant that any trained armorer could rebuild a pistol using parts from multiple sources. That capability was essential for maintaining weapons that had been in service for decades. The slide manufacturing technology represented perhaps the most significant advancement in precision and durability. Vietnam-era slides incorporated improved steel alloys, more precise machining tolerances, and enhanced surface treatments that reduced wear and improved reliability under harsh tropical conditions. The spring technology evolution was crucial for maintaining reliable function across extended service life. Early M1911 pistols used springs manufactured with traditional steel alloys and heat treatment processes, while Vietnam-era weapons incorporated advanced spring steels and controlled atmosphere heat treating that significantly extended component life. The sight technology improvements reflected both advancing manufacturing capabilities and evolving tactical requirements. While early pistols featured simple fixed sights adequate for cavalry combat, Vietnam-era weapons often incorporated improved sight designs that enhanced accuracy for the precision shooting required in tunnel clearing and urban combat operations. The grip technology evolution demonstrated American understanding of human factors, engineering, and ergonomics. The transition from checkered wooden grips to molded plastic grips improved durability and consistency while reducing manufacturing costs and maintenance requirements. Chief Warrant Officer Wayne Westenberger, who supervised pistol modification programs for special operations units, documented the impact of these technological improvements. The basic design remained unchanged, but the materials and manufacturing techniques used in Vietnam-era pistols represented 50 years of continuous improvement. The result was weapons that were more reliable, accurate, and durable than anything Browning could have imagined. The ammunition technology evolution paralleled weapon improvements and significantly enhanced combat effectiveness. The standard 45 ACP cartridge used in Vietnam incorporated advanced propellants, improved bullet designs, and enhanced manufacturing quality control that delivered superior performance compared to early military loads. The propellant chemistry used in Vietnam-era ammunition represented decades of advancement in energetic materials science. While early 45 ACP loads used traditional black powder or simple smokeless powders, Vietnam-era cartridges incorporated advanced propellant formulations that delivered more consistent performance across wide temperature ranges. The bullet technology improvements were equally significant for combat effectiveness. Vietnam-era military ball ammunition featured bullets manufactured to tighter tolerances with improved lead alloys and more consistent jacket thickness that enhanced accuracy and terminal performance. The primer technology evolution improved ignition reliability under adverse conditions common in tropical environments. Advanced primer compounds and sealing techniques reduced the risk of misfires due to moisture contamination, a crucial improvement for weapons stored in high humidity conditions. The cartridge case technology represented substantial improvements in brass manufacturing and quality control. Vietnam-era cases featured more consistent dimensions, improved metallurgy, and enhanced corrosion resistance that supported multiple reload cycles and extended service life. The quality control evolution in ammunition manufacturing was reflected in statistical performance improvements documented during Vietnam operations. Lot acceptance testing showed malfunction rates for Vietnam-era ammunition that were significantly lower than those recorded for earlier production, demonstrating the value of advanced manufacturing techniques. The testing and evaluation procedures used to validate these technological improvements were more sophisticated than anything available during the pistol's original development. Vietnam-era testing included environmental testing, accelerated aging studies, and statistical analysis techniques that provided comprehensive performance data across a wide range of operating conditions. The field testing programs conducted during Vietnam provided real-world validation of technological improvements under actual combat conditions. Unlike laboratory testing, which could only simulate combat stresses, Vietnam operations provided direct feedback on the effectiveness of design changes and manufacturing improvements. Warrant Officer Larry Winslow, who conducted field testing of modified pistols and ammunition during Vietnam, described the value of combat validation. Laboratory tests could tell us how things should work in theory, but only combat operations could tell us how they actually worked when soldiers' lives depended on them. That feedback was invaluable for continuous improvement. The maintenance technology evolution reflected improved understanding of weapon lubrication, cleaning procedures, and component replacement schedules. Vietnam-era maintenance manuals incorporated lessons learned from decades of service and provided more effective procedures for maintaining peak performance under adverse conditions. The tool technology improvements enabled more effective field maintenance with lighter, more portable equipment. Advanced cleaning tools, specialized lubricants, and improved diagnostic procedures allowed unit armorers to maintain weapons to higher standards with reduced logistics requirements. The training technology evolution incorporated advanced instructional techniques, improved training aids, and more effective qualification procedures that enhanced soldier proficiency with upgraded weapon systems. Vietnam-era training programs reflected accumulated knowledge about effective pistol employment and optimal training techniques. The documentation technology improvements provided more comprehensive technical information and more effective distribution of lessons learned. Vietnam-era technical manuals incorporated decades of operational experience and provided more detailed guidance for optimizing weapon performance. The industrial base evolution that supported M1911A1 operations during Vietnam demonstrated American manufacturing flexibility and capacity for continuous improvement. The network of contractors, subcontractors, and suppliers that provided weapons, ammunition, and spare parts represented one of the most sophisticated military production systems ever developed. The quality assurance evolution reflected advancing understanding of statistical process control and reliability engineering. Vietnam-era production incorporated quality control procedures that ensured consistent performance and reduced the variability that had characterized earlier manufacturing periods. Colonel Cliff Vesey, who managed pistol production programs during Vietnam, summarized the significance of these technological improvements. "We took Browning's brilliant original design and made it better in every way that mattered for combat effectiveness. Better materials, better manufacturing, better ammunition, better maintenance. The result was a weapon system that performed better in 1968 than it did in 1911. The system's integration evolution represented perhaps the most significant advancement in optimizing pistol effectiveness for specific mission requirements. Rather than treating the weapon as an isolated component, Vietnam-era programs considered the complete system, including the pistol, ammunition, holster, accessories, training, and logistics support. This system's approach enabled optimization of overall effectiveness rather than individual component performance. The result was weapon systems that were specifically tailored to the requirements of tunnel fighting, helicopter operations, riverine warfare, and other specialized missions encountered during Vietnam. The technology transfer from Vietnam operations influenced civilian and law enforcement applications for decades after the conflict ended. Manufacturing techniques, materials science, and design improvements developed for military use were adapted for commercial applications that benefited shooters worldwide. The international technology influence of Vietnam-era improvements was reflected in weapon designs adopted by allied nations and commercial manufacturers globally. The proven effectiveness of American technological improvements influenced pistol development programs in multiple countries and established performance standards that guided the industry for generations. As American involvement in Vietnam drew to a close, the technological legacy of the M1911A1's final military deployment provided a foundation for future weapon development programs. The lessons learned about materials science, manufacturing techniques, and systems integration continued to influence American military technology for decades after the last pistol was withdrawn from Southeast Asian service. The steel may have been forged in earlier eras, but the technology that shaped its final combat deployment represented the best of American engineering and manufacturing capability. When Vietnam-era soldiers carried their .45s into tunnel systems and urban battles, they were carrying 70 years of continuous technological improvement focused on a single goal: keeping American warriors alive when everything else failed. The formal end of American combat operations in Vietnam on March 29, 1973, marked not just the conclusion of America's longest war, but the beginning of the end for the M1911A1's role as the standard sidearm of the United States military. The pistol that had served through 4 major conflicts and countless smaller engagements would soon face its most formidable opponent. Not an enemy army, but the inexorable march of military modernization and NATO standardization. By 1975, as the last American personnel evacuated from Saigon and North Vietnamese tanks rolled through the streets of the former South Vietnamese capital, military planners in Washington were already deep into evaluation programs for the .45's replacement. The irony was palpable after proving its effectiveness in the most intensive small unit warfare in American military history. The M1911A1 was being declared obsolete by bureaucrats who had never fired a shot in anger. The replacement program that would eventually lead to the adoption of the Beretta M9 pistol in 1985 was driven more by political considerations than tactical requirements. NATO standardization initiatives called for member nations to adopt common ammunition types, with 9mm parabellum being the alliance standard for pistol cartridges. Colonel Michael Washburn, who served on the Joint Service Small Arms Program Evaluation Board, understood the political dynamics. The decision to replace the .45 wasn't based on combat effectiveness or soldier preference. It was based on NATO politics and the desire to standardize ammunition types across the alliance. From a purely tactical standpoint, the .45 was still the most effective pistol cartridge available. The technical evaluation process that led to the M1911A1's replacement revealed the difficulty of improving upon a proven design. Multiple trials conducted throughout the 1970s and early 1980s consistently showed that while newer pistol designs offered certain advantages, higher magazine capacity, lighter weight, and different manual of arms, none provided significantly better combat effectiveness than the Vietnam-proven .45. The soldier preference surveys conducted during the evaluation process showed overwhelming support for retaining the M1911A1 among personnel who had combat experience with the weapon. Veterans of Vietnam tunnel fighting, helicopter operations, and special operations consistently rated the .45 as superior to proposed replacements in terms of stopping power and reliability. Master Sergeant Thomas A. Baker, who had survived multiple combat tours armed with his M1911A1, represented the views of thousands of combat veterans. They can run all the tests they want in laboratories and on firing ranges, but when you've used a .45 to save your life in a tunnel or a firefight, you understand that some things can't be measured in spreadsheets. That pistol worked when nothing else would. The cost analysis of replacement versus continued service revealed the economic efficiency of retaining existing weapons. The total cost of procuring new pistols for the entire military, including development costs, production costs, training costs, and logistics infrastructure changes, approached $2 billion, money that many argued could be better spent on other military priorities. The industrial base considerations were equally significant. The network of contractors, suppliers, and manufacturers that supported M1911A1 operations represented decades of accumulated expertise and investment. Replacing this established industrial base with new suppliers created risks and uncertainties that concerned military logistics planners. The training implications of pistol replacement were substantial. Millions of American military personnel had been trained on the M1911A1, and this accumulated expertise represented a significant investment in human capital. Transitioning to a completely different weapon system required extensive retraining programs that consumed time and resources. The international implications of replacing the M1911A1 affected American military assistance programs worldwide. Dozens of allied nations had received American pistols through military aid programs, and these weapons remained in service with American allies and partners globally. Replacing the American military's sidearm created logistics and interoperability challenges for these international relationships. Lieutenant Colonel Wayne Westenberger, who managed international military assistance programs, described these challenges. "We had allies around the world who were still using .45s we had provided through military aid programs. When we changed to a completely different weapon system, we created logistics problems for countries that depended on American support for maintenance and ammunition." The psychological impact of pistol replacement on American military personnel was difficult to quantify but undeniably significant. The M1911A1 had become more than just a weapon, it was a symbol of American military tradition and proven combat effectiveness. Replacing it with a foreign-designed weapon was seen by many soldiers as a rejection of that tradition. The combat effectiveness comparisons between the M1911A1 and proposed replacements consistently favored the established design in scenarios that replicated actual combat conditions. While newer pistols performed well in laboratory tests, they often failed to match the combat-proven reliability and stopping power of the .45 under stress. The ammunition logistics advantages of retaining the .45 included the massive existing inventory of ammunition, the established production capacity, and the specialized loads that had been developed for specific mission requirements. Changing to a different cartridge meant abandoning these investments and starting over with new ammunition development programs. The special operations community was particularly resistant to pistol replacement, arguing that the unique requirements of covert operations were better served by the proven .45 than by any proposed alternative. The availability of specialized ammunition, suppressor compatibility, and established maintenance procedures made the M1911A1 particularly valuable for these missions. Captain Larry E. Nunn, who commanded special operations units during the transition period, described the special operations perspective. "For our missions, reliability and stopping power were more important than magazine capacity or NATO standardization. The .45 had proven itself in every type of combat situation we encountered, and we didn't see any advantage in changing to something different." The law enforcement adoption of the M1911A1 design by American police departments created an additional argument for military retention. Many police agencies had adopted .45 caliber pistols based on military experience and combat effectiveness data, and these agencies continued to report excellent results with the cartridge and weapon system. The civilian market embrace of the M1911A1 design demonstrated its enduring appeal beyond military applications. Commercial manufacturers produced thousands of pistols based on Browning's design, and competitive shooters consistently chose .45 caliber weapons for accuracy and reliability in demanding competitions. The technological development programs initiated to extend M1911A1 service life demonstrated the potential for modernizing existing weapons rather than replacing them entirely. These programs included improved materials, enhanced manufacturing techniques, and modernized accessories that updated the basic design without abandoning its proven effectiveness. The congressional hearings on pistol replacement revealed significant political opposition to abandoning a weapon system that had served effectively for over 70 years. Representatives and senators, many of whom were veterans themselves, questioned the wisdom of replacing a combat-proven weapon with unproven alternatives. Representative Bob Stump of Arizona, himself a Korean War veteran, spoke for many in Congress. "We're talking about replacing a pistol that has saved American lives in every major conflict since World War I with foreign-designed weapons that have never been tested under comparable combat conditions. That seems like false economy to me." The phased replacement program that eventually led to M1911A1 retirement was designed to minimize disruption and allow for evaluation of new weapons under actual service conditions. The process took over a decade to complete and involved extensive testing and evaluation phases that validated the performance of replacement weapons. The units that retained M1911A1 pistols during the transition period included Special Operations Forces, military police units, and other specialized organizations that required maximum reliability and stopping power. These units continued to report excellent performance from their aging pistols even as other units transitioned to newer designs. The final production run of M1911A1 pistols for military use occurred in 1945, but the military continued to purchase replacement parts and components through the 1990s to support weapons remaining in service. This parts support enabled continued operation of selected weapons for specific mission requirements. The international sales of surplus M1911A1 pistols provided continued service life for weapons that were no longer needed by American forces. Many of these pistols were transferred to allied nations or sold through government programs to qualified civilian purchasers, ensuring that the weapons continued to serve useful purposes. The museum and ceremonial roles assumed by selected M1911A1 pistols preserved examples of the weapon for historical and educational purposes. These weapons became part of military history collections that documented the role of American small arms in major conflicts throughout the 20th century. The influence of M1911A1 combat experience on future weapon development was reflected in the specifications and requirements for replacement weapons. Many of the performance standards and reliability requirements for newer pistols were derived directly from lessons learned during 70 years of M1911A1 service. The training doctrine developed around M1911A1 employment continued to influence military marksmanship programs even after the weapon was replaced. The emphasis on precision shooting, weapon familiarity, and close-quarters combat techniques remained relevant for newer weapon systems. The maintenance philosophy perfected during decades of M1911A1 service provided a foundation for supporting more complex weapon systems. The procedures and techniques developed for maintaining aging weapons under adverse conditions proved valuable for supporting modern military equipment. As the last M1911A1 pistols were retired from active military service in the late 1980s, they left behind a legacy that transcended their specific technical capabilities. They had proven that well-designed weapons could remain relevant across multiple generations of warfare, that soldier confidence was as important as technical specifications, and that some things become classic because they simply work better than their replacements. The steel that had served from the Argonne Forest to the Mekong Delta had finally found peace in retirement, but the lessons it taught about reliability, effectiveness, and the enduring value of proven design continued to influence American military thought for generations. When modern soldiers faced their own moments of truth in later conflicts, they carried with them the confidence that comes from a tradition of weapons that worked when everything else failed. The .45 was gone, but its legacy remained carved not in steel or bronze, but in the knowledge that American warriors deserved weapons that would never let them down when their lives hung in the balance. In the humid darkness of a museum display case at the National Infantry Museum at Fort Moore, Georgia, a worn M1911A1 pistol rests beneath spotless glass, its parkerized finish dulled by decades of service and its brown plastic grips polished smooth by countless hands. The placard beside it reads simply, U.S. Pistol, Caliber .45, M1911A1, serial number 1916432, manufactured by Remington Rand, 1943. Served in World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. But those stark facts tell only the beginning of this particular pistol story. The serial number records show that this weapon was first issued to 2nd Lieutenant James Mitchell of the 3rd Armored Division in November of 1944, just as American forces were pushing through the Siegfried Line toward the Rhine River. Mitchell carried it through the Battle of the Bulge, across the bridge at Remagen, and into the heart of Nazi Germany before returning it to depot storage in 1946. 5 years later, it was reissued to Master Sergeant Robert Chun of the 1st Marine Division, who carried it up the frozen slopes of the Chosin Reservoir during the darkest hours of the Korean conflict. Chen's pistol accounted for 3 confirmed enemy casualties during the Marine fighting withdrawal from Hagaru-ri, and the small dent in the frame above the trigger guard came from a Chinese grenade fragment that nearly ended both their stories in the hills above Kodo-ri. By 1967, after another complete arsenal rebuild, it had found its way into the hands of Staff Sergeant Michael Rodriguez of the 25th Infantry Division, who would carry it through 3 tours in Vietnam. Rodriguez used this pistol to fight his way out of 2 tunnel systems, defend a landing zone during the Tet Offensive, and provide covering fire during the evacuation of wounded soldiers from a rice paddy near Siu Chi. When Rodriguez finally turned in his pistol at the end of his 3rd tour in 1970, he asked the armorer to let him know if the weapon ever became available for purchase. 23 years later, when the Army finally began selling surplus pistols to qualified veterans, Rodriguez was the first person to submit an application. But by then, this particular pistol had already been selected for museum display, deemed too historically significant to return to civilian hands. Rodriguez understood. "That pistol saved my life more times than I can count," he said during the museum dedication ceremony. "It deserves to be here, where people can understand what it meant to those of us who carried it. Not everyone gets to hold a piece of history that held them back from the edge when nothing else could." The stories multiply across America, in gun safes and display cases, police evidence rooms and collectors' vaults. Each surviving M1911A1 carries with it the memories of the men who trusted their lives to 7 rounds of 45 ACP ammunition and the mechanical precision of John Moses Browning's greatest design. At the Colt manufacturing facility in Hartford, Connecticut, production lines that once turned out thousands of military pistols now craft civilian versions for sport shooters and collectors who understand that some designs transcend their era. The basic specifications remain unchanged: 8.5 inches overall length, 5.03-inch barrel, 45 ACP chambering, but the market has expanded to include variations that Browning could never have imagined. The competitive shooting community has embraced the M1911 design with an enthusiasm that borders on obsession. At Camp Perry, Ohio, during the national matches, hundreds of shooters compete with pistols derived from the basic military design, proving that accuracy potential that was merely adequate for combat becomes exceptional when refined for precision shooting. In law enforcement agencies across America, specialized units still carry 45 caliber pistols based on the M1911 design. The Los Angeles Police Department SWAT team, the FBI hostage rescue team, and Delta Force continue to trust their lives to weapons that trace their lineage directly to the pistol that served in Vietnam. The international legacy extends far beyond American borders. Military forces in over 40 nations continue to use M1911 pattern pistols, many of them original American-manufactured weapons transferred through military assistance programs during the Cold War era. These weapons continue to serve effectively in conflicts and security operations worldwide, proving that good design recognizes no national boundaries. The manufacturing legacy lives on in companies throughout the United States and internationally. Kimber, Springfield Armory, Smith & Wesson, Sig Sauer, and dozens of smaller manufacturers produce pistols based on Browning's design, each adding their own refinements while preserving the essential characteristics that made the original so successful. The training legacy persists in military marksmanship programs that still emphasize the fundamentals of sight alignment, trigger control, and follow-through that were perfected on M1911A1 pistols. While the weapons have changed, the principles remain the same, passed down from generation to generation of American warriors who understood that precision trumps technology when lives are at stake. In Afghanistan and Iraq, American soldiers carrying modern M9 pistols often spoke enviously of their grandfathers' 45s, having heard stories of stopping power and reliability that seemed legendary compared to their 9mm sidearms. Some special operations units quietly returned to 45 caliber weapons, proving that the lessons of Vietnam had not been forgotten by those who needed them most. The psychological legacy endures in the confidence that comes from carrying a weapon with a proven combat record. Modern soldiers may carry different pistols, but they carry them with the knowledge that American military tradition includes weapons that worked when everything else failed, that stopped threats with single shots, and that never let down the soldiers who depended upon them. The technical legacy influences every aspect of modern pistol design. The controlled feed system, the grip angle, the trigger mechanism, and the field stripping procedure pioneered in the M1911 continue to appear in contemporary weapon designs, proving that innovation often means returning to fundamentals that were right from the beginning. The cultural legacy transcends military applications entirely. The M1911A1 has become an American icon, appearing in films, literature, and popular culture as a symbol of American resolve and capability. Its distinctive silhouette is instantly recognizable, its reputation universally understood, its place in American history permanently secured. The collector legacy has created a market where original M1911A1 pistols, particularly those with documented military service, command prices that would astound the soldiers who carried them into combat. A pistol that cost the government $14.25 in 1911 might sell for thousands of dollars today, not because of its material value but because of its historical significance. The family legacy lives on in gun safes across America, where M1911A1 pistols are passed from fathers to sons, from grandfathers to grandchildren, each transfer carrying with it stories of service and sacrifice that connect modern Americans to their military heritage. These weapons become family heirlooms that preserve not just mechanical artifacts but the memories of those who served. The instructional legacy continues in the countless books, articles, and training programs that teach the proper employment of M1911 pattern pistols. The accumulated wisdom of 70 years of military service provides a foundation for understanding not just how to shoot these weapons, but how to maintain them, modify them, and optimize their performance for specific applications. The spiritual legacy transcends the physical weapon itself. For many veterans, their M1911A1 represented more than just a tool. It was a companion that shared their dangers, a trusted partner that never failed them when they needed it most, a symbol of their service and their survival. That emotional connection cannot be measured in technical specifications or expressed in numbers, but it forms part of the permanent record of American military experience. As new generations of Americans face new threats with new weapons, they carry with them the legacy of those who went before, soldiers who proved that courage, training, and reliable weapons could overcome any odds, that stopping power mattered more than politics, and that some things never become obsolete because they were right from the beginning. The M1911A1 service in Vietnam marked the end of an era, but it also marked the beginning of a legend. The steel may rest quietly in museums and collections, but the spirit it represents, American ingenuity, reliability, and the absolute commitment to giving warriors the tools they need to come home alive, lives on in every weapon that follows. When modern soldiers face their moments of truth, when everything depends on the next 7 rounds, when technology fails and training becomes instinct, they stand in the footsteps of those who carried the 45. They may carry different weapons, but they carry the same promise: that American warriors deserve weapons that will never let them down, no matter how desperate the situation or how long the odds. The steel lives on, not in the metal itself, but in the promise it kept and the legacy it left. In a world where everything becomes obsolete, some things endure because they touch something deeper than technology. They touched the human spirit and proved worthy of the trust that American warriors placed in them. 7 rounds of 45 ACP ammunition, 8.5 inches of American steel, 70 years of faithful service, a lifetime of soldiers who came home because their weapons worked when nothing else would. The steel lives on.